Good morning, everyone. It is 6:34. Welcome to Mornings with Bob Marrone. I am Bob Marrone. This is Radio Westchester, your radio station at the train station. Good morning. It's chilly. It is, of course, March, and these are the Ides of March. It's March 6th, 2020. It's 39 degrees, but frankly, it feels much colder. It feels like it's the 20s, so I can't figure out why we got this reading. It is even cold here in the studio, but hey, it's been warm most of the time, so we'll take it. Scattered clouds today. We'll cover the weather with you in just a moment, but obviously the big news today is the coronavirus still. Indeed, a rabbi of young Israel has been identified as one of the new patients, and he teaches at yeshiva as well. His son is also identified with the disease. 2 employees at Iona College are under self-quarantine due to the potential exposure to the virus. And guess what's finally in the news? And we spoke with him only a few days ago, Marco Guriello from the Journal News, and Memorial Field is in the news. We'll be talking about that today. Those stories and more coming up. This is Radio Westchester. Let's get a look at the weather. Well, once again, we're going to go with 35 degrees this morning, even though one of our indicators says 39. It's not 39. I wish it was 39 degrees. The weather's brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhgc.com. So it's 35, mix of sun and clouds with late showers today, though. Weird storm coming up tonight. The temperature's going to get up to 46 today, though, and I won't be complaining, I promise you. Tonight, mostly cloudy, getting down to 31. Tomorrow, lots of sunshine and breezy. The temperature will be 43. And into Sunday, lots of sunshine. The temperature getting up near 60. Monday, 44. Now, we saw some indicators for those of you who like to look way ahead, that sometime around the middle of next week, we might even see 65. All right, let's get into the stories of the day, and stories they are. The rabbi of young Israel in New Rochelle has been identified as one of the 22 coronavirus patients here, almost all of them here in New Rochelle, according to a tweet by the university. Now, the rabbi is also a professor at yeshiva, so we don't know what the school's going to do yet, but his son also has been identified as having the virus. Meanwhile, right here in New Rochelle, 2 employees of Iona are under self-quarantine amid the outbreak. In Washington, a 50-year-old man, as you know, who attended a few events at his local synagogue before this broke out, and attending a bat mitzvah. Hundreds of people were there, and so many of those are on lockdown in their homes. I know that's a tough way to put it, but they're in quarantine. But some of them should be getting out, if you will, this weekend. So all roads right now, in terms of the large amount of virus sufferers here in New Rochelle, still lead back, with except for those 2 in Iona, lead back to Temple, Israel, and that particular individual there who worshiped there, the lawyer from New York. Now, the coronavirus test results were expected today from some passengers and crew aboard a cruise ship held off the California coast. The Grand Princess lay at anchor near San Francisco on Thursday after a traveler from a previous voyage died of the disease, and at least 4 others became infected. While the more than 3,500 aboard the 951-foot, 200-meter vessel were ordered to stay at sea, as officials scrambled to keep the virus at bay. Only 45 were identified for testing. Meanwhile, the helicopter has actually dropped off test kits at the ship, and that's becoming a problem nationally. Vice President Pence announced last night that the country does not have enough test kits. The president today will sign a multi-billion-dollar bill to be sure that the supplies that we need, that is as a country, are made available. Now, as the virus spreads, school districts are trying to answer the pressing question, When and under what circumstances should they close? Superintendents have made clear to the state education department and other state agencies that they need guidance. And the number of one priority, they say, is to get clarity. And obviously, they're not quite getting it yet. And in Westchester, where, of course, 18 of the 22 cases have been confirmed, 2 school districts have already closed. Hastings-on-Hudson closed a school, and Mount Vernon has closed 2 schools. Now, in New Rochelle, though the site of New York's first confirmed case and the epicenter of the other 18, this school district has chosen to stay open. It is 6:41. And I want to be sure I get through all of these others. All righty, this is a story we're going to enjoy talking about today. We'll be commenting about it in a little while. It is 6:41. This by Mark Lingriello and Jonathan Bandler. He gave us a preview of this story on Monday when he came on Radio Westchester Mornings with Bob Marrone. One Westchester County lawmaker believes, and this is how it opens up, someone would have been held accountable for illegal dumping, and well, he is right. Now, he says it might not have happened if it wasn't a community of color. Tons of dirt and debris were dumped at the field, the largest open space in the city. There's only a municipality where black folks are in the majority. Had this occurred anywhere else, legislator Lyndon Williams said, and we've spoken with him many times, I believe nothing was done that was done to help it. He says, it has been 5 years since the dumping seems to have begun, but no one has faced criminal charges, county charges, or federal investigations. And he called it another in a series of environmental injustices on, he says, black communities across the country. By way of commentary, one thing I fear, and we will get the legislator on, and he has been very vocal, and I applaud his efforts. But I think in this case, while I agree with him, they probably would not, and again, it's an opinion, I don't think it would happen in Mamaroneck or Rye or anything like that. I think that to focus, at least at this juncture, on the fact that it's a black community, while it's noteworthy and true, to focus on that as purely a racial issue might obscure the point. Because what's happened in Mount Vernon, depending on how many years you go back, is something that is likely a product of that community, black, white, or whatever. And we have seen the politics of it. And before I get labeled purely as an apologist for Richard Thomas, which I'm not, I'm an apologist for justice. This young man ran for office on this very premise, on this very assertion that Mr. Lyndon Williams rightly makes about no one being held accountable. He ran under the very strong assertion, and even while he was still a councilman, on the very strong assertion that the relationship between the comptroller and the city in general, as a position and a position vis-a-vis position, and then as the comptroller and he began their dance of obstruction, who's paying the bills, who didn't sign them, why weren't they paid? He ran on those issues. He pursued those issues, and warts and all, which is to say what he may have done with his, or did do, or was convicted of doing, and pled out with his campaign finance. Questionable personnel decisions, minimally causing him bad optics. Probably a bit of a young and callow hubris. Nonetheless, these were his issues. He drove them hard. And so now, finally, Memorial Field is getting built. I mean, he died on this parapet. Finally, the Attorney General, whose behavior I have questioned on this program and will continue to question vis-a-vis when Richard Thomas was mayor. A lot of other questions need to be answered, and we're going to get Mark Lingriello and Mr. Bandler back on this program, as well as Lyndon Williams. Now, a match has been lit in the cave. of Mount Vernon. This is a good thing. But what we need to find out is why, when they had their, it's a figure out of Greek mythology, they had their Cassandra. Cassandra being the person who yells, "Look out." They had their Cassandra. They had their man riding through the streets saying the British are coming, however flawed he might have been. And why it was more important to harass, why it was more important for political figures everywhere to abandon this young man, why it was important, or at least it appeared to be, that the Democratic Party at large abandoned this young man. Why? He's gone, and he cut enough of a deal. He'll be back one day, maybe not in politics. But all the signals were there. All the documents were there. The incredible numbers of dollars loaned without accountability. The tons of dirt at Memorial Field. The cooperation or lack thereof of the controller. The attempts by the city council, rightly or wrongly, to secure power for themselves. One career was ruined. No facts were aired. And now Memorial Field moves forward, and great for the Journal News that they did this story, and Lyndon Williams spoke out. But this is not the first time Lyndon Williams spoke out. When we have Lyndon Williams on, he will hear how he has written letters to the Attorney General, to the District Attorney, to the Governor and other legislators, as did Richard Thomas. And yes, if it was a white city, do I think it would have been, would it have gone this far? Absolutely not. But the nuance here is that it was, and it did happen. And it was probably, at least in the last several years, many think it goes back to when the city was led by white folks. But whomever did this is black. Whomever conspired to do this is a person of color, no doubt. And that's the rub. It is the politics in this case, not the color in terms of the offense. In terms of whether or not government should have treated it better is another history. The government has a history of doing, and when I say that, I mean the state, of what's politically expedient. When all those problems happened up in Rampo, and it was pretty clear that the Hasidic community and on the board were rediverting funds to private schools away from public schools, that had an ethnic tint, but it was a little different. In that case, the money was being diverted away from schools of people of color, which was one offense. But it also was being diverted to schools of the politically powerful. And so the school, the powers that be in Albany that knew all this was going on, refused to lose their power, to use it until the law finally caught up with the board. The governor did nothing. The powers that be did nothing, because in that context, the Hasidic community voted as a bloc and had the power up in the state Senate. That changed now when the Senate changed. All of a sudden, people were willing to look into the injustices in that town. So politics more than anything. And I'm not going to get dramatic and say I'm not going to rest until we find out what happened during Richard Thomas's administration. But for those of you who know how we run this radio program, even inspired by an old, silly, dopey hockey story of a fake hockey arena that never got built, and the press continued to write that it was under construction, that it was almost done, that it is near completion. One of the problems in our news community is that they handle the story and they move on. They handle the story and they go on to the next one. That's the job. It's a career. It's a business. But we're not doing a public service if we don't look back. And looking back is not always pleasurable, of course, but it's also not pleasurable for the people that one wants to seek justice for. When we had Richard Thomas on the other day, we said they are going to do an audit finally, as you called for. You could very well take a hit in this. So it's not always pleasurable, but it's necessary. So for people to say, let's move on, no, some things cannot be moved on from. The people of Mount Vernon have paid millions and millions of dollars for a memorial field that never got built. The county spent money. The state spent money. The city spent money. The county spent money. And it's your money, people of Mount Vernon, or the rest of the county, our taxpayers. Someone needs to be held accountable. Now, we're coming up in the statute of limitations. But even if they're not held accountable in terms of punitive actions, they need to be held accountable in the eyes of the people so that they can see what was going on behind the closed doors in City Hall. Now, the old axe applies, the old Napoleon axe. Don't attribute to malice what's more attributable to often incompetence. I mean, this is a city once where one of the mayors, a nice man who only had the job for 4 years, you couldn't get a call through the switchboard at City Hall. The place was, and then you go to a meeting and the major, and it's a beautiful conference room they have here. There's papers lying around, potato chip bags. Mount Vernon's got a lot to fix, but Mount Vernon has been failed by the powers that be, and Mount Vernon and that mayor, who they held accountable for what he did in terms of his campaign finance, but they didn't give that young man justice. That young man, it appears to be, was hounded out of office by more than just the people in Mount Vernon. Maybe rightly so, made some questionable decisions. But it appears on the face of it that that it was as political as much or maybe more than anything else. It is 6:52. We will be back. We got to cover the weather again. Good morning. Welcome to Radio Westchester. Once again, this is Mornings with Bob Marrone. I am Bob Marrone. The official weather's 39 degrees on our indicator, but it feels colder than that. It feels below freezing. So where they got this number from, I don't know. But it's a New Rochelle number, so I got to go with it. 39's the official temperature. Don't buy it. It's colder. But right now, mixed clouds with late day showers, that's for sure, and it is going to get up to 46 today. Tonight, mostly cloudy. The temperature will be 31 degrees, the wind out of the north, 10 to 25 miles an hour. Saturday, lots of sunshine, but breezy, 43. Sunday, more sunshine, getting up near 60. Monday, do you really want to think about Monday right now? Well, you'll have sunny skies when you return to work anyway. And that weather is brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhgc.com. And this bottom of the hour was brought to you by our friends at United Hebrew, a top-rated campus of senior care. Visit uhgc.com. Aging Issues Management, the law firm of Payne & Kahn, Dominic's Fine Cigars, and Plug-in Virtual Reality. There is, of course, other news. Very odd game last night. The Rangers won, but they won in overtime, and they got 5 goals, which is very, very rare from one hockey player, Mika Zibanejad. And I'm still trying to figure this one out. Record night. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And we'll come back to that in a little bit, but we have some other stories we do want to get to and some other short stories we want to get to. A federal judge, this came out of the Associated Press, and for those of you that followed the Mueller report, pro or con, and the evolution of the Mueller report and when it came out and how it was treated, this out of the Associated Press today, a federal judge on yesterday, sharply rebuked Attorney General William Barr's handling of the special counsel's Russia report, saying, Barr, now we're going to quote this, I know that everybody, they're going to say that the judges were biased, they're Democrats, and it's all fake news, but it's not. Misleading. I just got to get this. A gentleman's coming on next. Guys, take a seat and relax right there. Down there will work for a while. U.S. District Judge Reggie Walton delivered the criticism in a 23-page order saying, and I quote, Barr made misleading public statements to spin the investigation's findings in favor of President Donald Trump and had shown a lack of candor. Now, if anyone said that, They were being accused of being never Trumpers, hate Trumpers, but any fair-minded person knew he spun it. And others said, well, that's okay. It's politics. Sure enough, it is. And that's the disgrace of it. At any rate, U.S. District Judge Reggie Walton delivered the criticism in a 23-page order in which he directed the Justice Department to provide him with an unredacted version of the report so that he could decide if any additional information from the document could be publicly disclosed. The scolding was unusually blunt, with Walton saying Barr had appeared to make a calculated attempt to influence public opinion about the report in ways favorable to Trump. The rebuke tapped into lingering criticism of Barr from Democrats in Congress and Special Counsel Robert Mueller himself, that he had misrepresented some of the investigators' most damning findings. Well, Bob Mueller, you deserved it. You deserved it for being timid. Mr. Ex-Marine, Mr. Beacon of Truth. Yeah, you would have had to draw some conclusions. But so did the Founding Fathers when they decided to thumb their noses at the king. So did great warriors who decided it's time to draw a line in the sand and say, yes, I won't tolerate this. It was his chance to be a Paul Revere. It was his chance to be a Thomas Paine. It was his chance to be, like the Founding Fathers, willing to hang, if you will, for the truth, rather than just go along to get along. And Robert Mueller did nothing wrong. Not in the eyes of absolute objectivity. Okay? He pointed to a dead man lying on the street with someone hanging over that dead man with an axe and refused to say, it looks like a murder or it looks like an assault. The man has the axe, the body's lying there dead, but I'm too timid to call it what it is. So instead, he will go down in history in this country as one of America's quislings. Sad, as the president would say. Coming up on 6:57, we have some other news. And again now, this comes a day after another American on the other side threatened, and no matter how he tries to spin it, what in God's name? Now, I'm sure he didn't want the judges. He thought he was scolding, and of course we're talking about the Senator Schumer. Of course, he didn't want the senators attacked. He wasn't thinking. I get that. He wanted to say, you'll regret it because you're the enemy. We don't call judges here the enemy in this country, Mr. Schumer. And you'll get when he framed it as a threat, he should be called to account. He should be sanctioned. Enough of this. Now, this is something people on the left are going to defend Schumer, and they should not. People on the right are going to say that this judge is biased. Folks, we are going to have to start playing by the rules and take our judges seriously. And if a judge can't be taken seriously, she ought to be impeached. Now, on a lower level, there are lots of judges that should be taken seriously, but that for another day. It is 6:59. We're going to take a look at some of the other news. An ER doctor saying that Americans must live their lives. 98 to 99% of people who get the coronavirus will do just fine. In the face of rapidly spreading coronavirus anxiety, Americans must continue to live their lives. GW School of Medicine and Health Services Disaster and Operational Medicine Fellowship Director Dr. James Phillips said this on Fox News, and I agree with him. People tell them, oh, God, you're working by the radio station. People are going to come here. Now, I'm going to tell you, regardless of how it's spun, there are less people. There were less people yesterday in the train station. I asked officials there than usual, and there were less numbers of cars, and there was less activity out here. So there was. And so I understand that, particularly the trains. But, man, I'm not going to live my life like that. I don't think you should either. 6:59. A driver pulled over. Now, you're going to love this. Pulled over yesterday in Louisiana. He had a 1997 expired license plate, and he said, and I quote, "Sorry, officer, I've been busy lately." All right. We rail about this once in a while on this program, how science misinformation is making its way into U.S. classrooms. As misinformation spreads about the coronavirus outbreak, the science community overall is on edge over false information. The anti-science movement has even made its way into classrooms, confusing students about what's true and what's myth. CBS and Originals executive producer and correspondent Anna Yamaguchi joined others in fighting the war on science. And we see it all the time. We have some schools that want to tell you that there was actually a real Noah's Ark and that the Earth is only 6,000 years old. And they want you to say, well, that's the alternative. You got to teach both sides. No, we don't. That goes in religion class. And religion, even if it in its best and most cherished instances, uses myth and it uses different allegories and such to make a point. But we can't be teaching kids that the Earth is 6,000 years old when we know through carbon dating, we know through the way light and rays work, we know that the distances of the galaxies moving out from the center of where they started, what time is in that instance and what the creation of matter is in that instance and how long it's existed, it is incontrovertible. The U.S. will be able to test 400,000 people for the coronavirus by week's end. We've touched that enough. People are really struggling with with one piece of coronavirus advice, and it's this. As the Senate passed its $8.3 billion bill, we said the president will sign that today. Coronavirus response packages to make them. A number of outlets are reporting on a piece of advice circulating that that's not exactly easy to follow, which is that they should avoid touching their faces. It is very hard to do. I got a runny nose right now. It's not the coronavirus. I feel fine. I'm going to reach behind me and get a paper towel and dab it just a little bit. Now, a lot of people are asking if warm weather will alleviate the spread of the virus, and it will slow it because people aren't indoors, but it probably won't stop it. Again, the reason why people think that has something to do with the temperature. The thing with the winter is that people are inside a lot. They're in close proximity a lot. They stay in the house. They go to events. They go to the theater. They do other things together. And by the way, no, you won't contract coronavirus from a package. Okay? So, think about that just a little bit. All right, it is 7:03. We're going to take a little better look at the sports right now. And then, of course, Elizabeth Warren's out of the race. We'll get back to politics. Let's see what's going on in the world of sports. And I got to take that aforementioned towel. I don't have the coronavirus. You can come. In fact, we had a guest walk in the studio. And I told him where to park, and he hasn't been back. I hope he didn't get the virus. All righty, I'm so sick. If I have to read or look at one more story about Aaron Judge, I'm going to be sick. My God, it's March. I don't care. Aaron Judge will probably wind up playing. They've got to make stories. Look, I understand they send all these sports writers to Florida, sports writers, and there's someone who does the news. I know you got to come up with a story angle, but really? Really? Oh, God, what are we going to do if he can't? You've got the Yankees have enough hitters. They can sit down 6 guys, and they'll do fine. And if I read one more story about who's going to be the 6th starter on either the Mets or the Yankees, I'm going to puke. All right? So let's see what the heck else is going on. Man, I still can't figure out what's going to Yankee. But let me tell you, the Rangers, you give up 5 goals, you're not going to win hockey games. But Mika's Zibanejad became the 3rd Ranger to notch 5 goals in a game with his overtime winner Thursday night, 6-5 victory over the Capitals at the Garden. Who else got 5 goals for the Rangers in history? I wonder if Tom from Pelham's listening. I'll be back with that one. 2 other people, and both of them with interesting backgrounds. I will give you a hint, though. One did it in 1976, the other in 1983. And the other is the 1983 has 2 distinctions. One of them, a national treasure. The other, a tragedy, really, in his present life. So let's see what else is. Oh, God. And that's another thing I'm sick of reading about. But then again, I drone on and on about hockey, about the football draft. But that's only because I don't understand it enough. But that's why we have people like Jake Schaefer around and Steve Callis calling in to tell us how that's going to work. And man, I can't believe the money that's being thrown around. Can you, or the different pairs that they're looking at putting together to do football broadcasts? Now, there are all kind of gyrations for ESPN to try and put together a broadcast team of the great Al Michaels and Eli Manning. By the way, Michaels is connected. Al Michaels is connected to the hockey story I did about the 5 goals by a player in 1982. Tom is depressed this morning because the Islanders lost 4-2 to the lowly Senators yesterday, and their slide continues. And let's see what else is going on. All right, we have all kinds of news today. I know we're going to open up the phones in just a minute. I just want to be sure to cover all this stuff. Oh, the Post has got a story about Monica Lewinsky. With all this stuff going on, really, we know what happened with those two. A liar and user who feel sorry. But they got to run these stories because it's political. That story's been done to death, too. People should leave Monica Lewinsky alone and let her go on and lead her life. And, of course, we've got... There's this issue. There's a breaking story, and we don't have a lot about it yet, but we're going to look at where some out in Canarsie, some police officers may have had created a Rodney King moment. As soon as we know more about that, we will share that to you. Now, one of the stories in the New York Post is saying, warning to New York Cityers in isolation, quarantine or lockup. About 2,800 New York City residents are under quarantine to prevent the spread of the virus, and some could face fines or jail if they venture outside their homes. So I don't know, man. Then that becomes a lockup. Now, a comment by the president, and I think it needs to be read. President Donald Trump urged Americans to remain calm. I agree with him. Amid the rapidly spreading coronavirus outbreak, although it's a Fox News town hall. Good grief. Don't use that pulpit when you want to speak to everybody, Mr. President. Go on all the networks, because the minute we see Fox News, we worry. All right, we got a caller. And we'll get to that caller right now. Good morning. You're on Radio Westchester.
Hey, Bobby. It's Anthony. How are you?
Anthony, what's going on?
I want to see if I have this straight, so just hear me out for a minute.
Absolutely.
An African-American county legislator whose district is mainly made up of a largely African-American community.
Yes.
Which is run by African-American officials and has had an African-American mayor for decades, which is controlled by an African-American county board of elections chairperson, is complaining that what happened to Memorial Field is racism.
That's a good question, and I wrestled with that as well, my friend, as I did the story. From the times we had him on the air, and we'll give him a chance to talk a little bit more about it. From the times I've had him on the air, his point was, I don't think it's that it wasn't that it wasn't a system that was in the midst of corruption among black people. I think his point was that had it been a white town, the state would have acted more quickly. An element of that I believe, but the other part I do not believe. Racism has nothing to do with the fact that the place was run so horribly. So I get your point totally, and I tried to.
Let's understand something. The state officials are not going to act on anything when there's no will at the local level.
Interesting. Say more.
Especially when they're all of the same political ilk.
Well, yes. Well, let me ask you, because you follow this stuff closely, and I know it's Mount Vernon. Did you, as this was going on, did you get the same odd feeling in your gut that I did while it was going on, that there were, because here's the paradox for me, and it really troubles me. Thomas ran on the issues. Finally, these things got fixed, but he died on the Hill. So, in my view, as flawed as he may be, am I nuts?
He didn't die on the Hill, Bobby. He was executed. There's a difference. Okay? The things he did were wrong. He was convicted of. No, right. There is absolutely no question about it.
Exactly.
But that said, there are many, many politicians who have done the same and or worse and it was handled at the Board of Elections level. It never, ever went to court.
And that's what Richard has always said. And because something just doesn't seem right. And again, the paradox here, and I know I keep going back to it, so forgive me for my redundancy, but he ran on those two issues. That is what drove him.
Yeah, but Bobby, let's understand something. Nobody wants to come out and say what it is. It is that it happened on Ernie Davis's watch, and nobody wants to lay it at his feet, at least publicly.
Well, that's a great paradox because he's a wonderful man, vis-a-vis one-on-one, and everybody loves the guy. But you're right. There's this hesitancy to want to point the finger.
Has nothing to do with the way he governs or what's legal. Has nothing to do with the way he governs or what's legal or illegal.
You're absolutely right. But I'm glad you raised the question. But there is that distinction, and I've said it myself, full disclosure. I've always felt that if it were Rye or Mamaroneck, where these things were being done, the powers that be would have come in. But I had never thought of it until you mentioned it now, that one assumes that the people want that. Well, Richard certainly did. I have seen the letters. I have seen the letters to the appropriate authorities begging for help.
Yeah, but Bobby, let me explain something. And I shouldn't say explain something.
No, go ahead. No, please. I know how you mean it, Anthony. No, I know how you mean it. Go ahead.
You're right. The statement that it would not have happened in Harrison or Lodge, that's technically true. But as usual, the devil's in the details.
Yes.
You know why that wouldn't? Because the local people in those communities would be up in arms with pitchforks. Did you see that happen in Mount Vernon? No.
No.
As much light as you shined on it, did you? How many calls from residents, from Mount Vernon residents, did you receive?
Zero. And as A.J. Woodson says,
here again, this is what I mean when I say everything reverts back to the local level. If the local mayor doesn't want anything done because the people aren't up in arms, then why should the chairman of the county board of legislators and or the board of elections go out of their way to address it and bring a black eye to all?
You have to stop making sense. Otherwise, it'll ruin the show, Anthony. Very well said. And, A.J. Woodson from Black Westchester Magazine, that's one of his great frustrations, too, that he can't get the public to focus in on that. It's amazing stuff.
Because you won't see African Americans rise up against, beloved African Americans. That's what it boils down to. And that goes for other communities. I'm not singling them out. Because in the days where the Italians had control, it was the same way.
That's just
I go back to Mount Vernon. You got to remember, my father's from Mount Vernon.
I know.
I had Sunday dinner on South Fifth Avenue for the better part of 25 years back in the 60s. So I've seen that town go from Italian to African American, and I've lived and played at Memorial Field. So I know that town second only to New Rochelle.
Well, you know what is interesting, and A.J. Woodson covers this really well, how in Mount Vernon, within the African-American community, it's very tribal, and they eating one another alive. In other words, the Andre Wallace people versus the Thomas people versus the people that supported former Mayor Davis. And then, of course, the religious community has perhaps too much power than any religious community should, but it is a part of the culture in Mount Vernon. It's just sad, but I'm going to get Mark Lungriello back on early next week. In fact, he just sent me a tweet about the story, but they finally, and I commend the Journal News for doing a detailed story on this issue and putting it back on the front burner, boy. Anthony, thank you.
Something until somebody goes out in cuffs over what happened to Mount Vernon, the story will not have been told.
Well, thank you, and thanks for your take on it. Very much appreciated, my friend. See you soon. Anthony, everybody, thank you so much. As we move forward, let's take a look at what's coming up today. We have a couple of special guests. One of them's already arrived in the studio early, just gave me his business card. He's trying to everybody figures out how to get into it. But first of all, Vince Russo will be joining us at 7:20, and then at 7:35, we have a special today going right through 8 o'clock. There are many of you in this county who are probably familiar with the Demitasse Players, an existential troupe of actors and performers. With us today is Dr. Richard Cerulli. He's going to be joining us at 7:35. He is a producer and a playwright, and reminds me in some ways of myself in that he changed his career along the way, and now he does what he loves. He's even got a book in front of him. Now, is that a book for when we get to you, or is that a play? Oh, divorce. Yeah, he's talking about divorce. All righty, for all those you men and women out there have been divorced, he'll be talking about that. We speak with him at 7:35. Then Steve Callis will join us at 8 o'clock today instead of 8:50. We moved him there. Jake hopefully can call in, but Jake's been a little under the weather. We have another special guest today, Andre Smith, who's going to be talking with us about some technological issues, mostly related to G5. A lot of noise being made about that. And then everybody looks forward to Dr. Victor Sternberg, and we spent 30 minutes with him. And Mr. Harlan Ullman, who usually joins us on Wednesdays. Harlan is with us today, and we have a couple of surprises for you when dealing with Harlan. Obviously, we're going to talk about the election, and we're going to talk about the Super Tuesday. But we're also going to talk about a political issue that has to do with, NATO. And is NATO going to make it or not? And as you know, he's been a civilian advisor to the Atlantic Council. He's done work with NATO and other foreign ministers throughout the United States. It is 7:17, and we need to take a quick break. You're listening to Mornings with Bob Marrone. I am Bob Marrone. This is Radio Westchester, the train station's radio station. Should we say the radio station or the train station? All right, what did I do with my letter? I'm such a busy bee. My weather. All right, well, I know what it is. It's 39 degrees officially, but don't buy it. It feels colder than that. And why my own thermometer should read what it reads is an abomination to me. We will have some sleet and rain a little bit later tonight, but don't expect it to do very much. Tomorrow, 42, more sunshine on Sunday. The temperature's getting up into the high 40s, low 50s. Monday, mid-50s. And the weather's brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses. And it's right here in New Rochelle. All righty, we think we know who's on the line. He's a pain in the butt. In fact, there's a line we like to use from the honeymooners called Headaches and You Go Together. Please welcome Vince Russo. Good morning, Vince.
You are a blabbermouth.
You. Blabbermouth. You. Hey, I've been
Good morning.
Good morning. I've been praising my buddies over at the Journal News, some people that I've worked with. They finally did a full-fledged feature story on an issue that really bugs me, on a political issue that I have been working very closely with on the radio for 4 years. Finally did a feature story on why no one went to jail over it. Anyway, it's not that I'm gloating. It's like a little bit of relief that it's finally out there on the front pages.
Yeah, I hear you.
Because, I told you the other day, I always use as an example, and Vince was involved in this, and for those of you who are new listeners, when I came to the news, I was, in terms of looking back on stories, I've always been governed by what happened with the New York Slapshots hockey team.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember when they actually wrote in the paper, it's near completion?
You're right. It was still a car dealership.
It's still not, I wanted to bang my head against the wall. But I didn't know it happens in big stories, too. We have a murder in Mamaroneck. The cops couldn't find their butts with 10 hands. The guy still wrote. Everybody knows who did it. But the whole town knows who did it.
Oh,
but I'm being unfair to the cops. I'm sure there's some problem, but I never let it go. I try and do that story once a year. It's going on 7 stories now. It goes something like this. Do you want to hear just the basics? We have here in my left hand the postmaster. He's with a girl who just broke up with a ne'er-do-well. One day his tires are slashed. A couple of days later, the girl is in the apartment with him. Somebody lets the other guy in. I said we don't know who the other guy is officially. Someone let this dude in, knifed the guy to death, and they don't have any suspects.
No, well. Hey,
did you see the story I did on William Barr?
No, I didn't. But boy, oh boy, he's consistently is stepping on his shoelaces. That's for sure.
Well, no. A judge came out and said that he found misleading public statements to spin the investigation, Mueller's investigation, the Quisling Mueller, lack of candor, and his demanding a copy of Mueller's report so that he can decide what the public should know that's in the report. But nobody cares by now. See, that's again one of the things I'm getting at. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Because that's yesterday's news.
Yeah, it's 2 weeks ago's news. That's for sure.
What do you think happened to Mueller? What do you think? What do you think? Do you think that somebody used a snipper on him?
I don't know. I mean, he could have honestly felt that that's the position he had to take. I don't know. It's baffling.
It is baffling, and well, the analogy I say is, you got a dead body on the floor, and somebody's standing over the body with an axe, and you say, "Well, there's a dead body and there's an axe. What do you want me to tell you?" You know what I want you to tell me? Whack, 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 whack. God, this guy was a Marine.
Hey, by the way, I watched that Ranger game last night.
I did not.
Ahmadinejad scored 5 goals.
I know. All right. Now, I had a quiz, and you weren't listening, but I'm going to give you the quiz anyway. Okay, well, my guests don't listen. I'm just breaking your chops. All right. Just got up. I slept 10 hours yesterday. I was so tired I couldn't even think straight. All right, here we go. Which other 2 New York Rangers got 5 goals in the game? Now, a couple of hints.
That would be
Oh, you
Phil
cheated.
Esposito.
Nope. Phil Esposito.
Really?
Sounds like a baker, but he's a good hockey player. Hey, come to Esposito's with Kyle Zones. Right, go ahead.
Let's see. And while they were a Ranger?
No, while they were a Cleveland Indian. What basis would it have while they were a Ranger? Come on.
Well,
now.
they could have been playing for
All
someone
right,
else.
I'm going to help you out here. One was in. Okay, this is not fair, but I'm going to go there. One was in 1976, and we Ranger fans used to call him the Spoon. All right. Come on now. Tick, 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 tick. Don Murdoch.
Oh, Murdoch. I was going to say Duguay.
Remember the Spoon.
Murdoch.
Now, this next one, if you don't get it,
Really?
but you will. 1983. And this individual is famous for something that has become a national treasure and recently back in the papers 40 years later. Oh, man. All right, Mark Pavlich.
Really?
Yeah, he got 5 goals. Remember, he was a great player for about 3 years. And for those of you who have a heart, he's been suffering from mental illness, and he is in a hospital as we speak.
Yeah. Wow, I was unaware of those guys.
But you know what? You can't give up 5 goals and hope to be competitive to get to the Stanley Cup, though. I mean, you can't give up 5 goals.
Yeah, it's true. Well, but they beat Washington. Washington's been playing very well. I'm surprised about the Flyers. Holy moly!
Now you could see that coming. Because of proximity, I get a chance to get a lot of Flyer news from Ian, and he's not a Flyer fan, thank God. That's been bred out of him genetically. But they've been building a really good team, and they have the former Ranger coach there.
Lane Vigneault.
Lane Vigneault. They're doing very well. And in fact, I predicted last week, and it killed me because we have Marrone's picks of the week. I predicted that they would beat the Rangers, and it killed me to say it.
You know, the team I'm surprised about is the Islanders. They started off with a bang. I mean, they went like 17 games where they got a point, and then I guess they got some injuries or whatever, and then boy, oh boy, they've really fallen off. They lost last night to Ottawa, which... I
know.
Don't get too much worse than that.
That was like the Christians defeated the Lions yesterday by a score. What else is on your mind this morning, my friend? It is 7:24. Vince is with us.
Well, again, how the Elizabeth Warren finally realized that she wasn't going to be president.
Would you leave her alone?
I'm not leaving her alone. I mean, it's a matter of, she came in third in her home state. Like, what the heck was there to think about? I mean, please. And so now it's just Bernie and Joe going toe-to-toe at it, and we'll see how it's going to shake out. I think most Democrats now are going to go with the safe bet and say we have to have Joe. We can't have, give Donald Trump the ability to every other word say socialist, socialist, socialist.
Yeah.
So I think, and the Trump camp realizes that because now they're reviving the whole thing about Ukraine and investigating.
Well, the Trump campaign is very well run in that instance, and they did their work a year ago, and knew that the one guy that could beat him was Biden. Although I saw something funny, I have to give Anthony, or maybe it was Tom from Pullum, full credit for this. You know, whether you like Biden or not, if you don't have a sense of humor, folks, it was. I laugh every time. It was a picture of Biden. It was like it was a send up on when you do a commercial. Hi, I'm Joe Biden, and I forgot this message. I was laughing so hard. That's what I did. I couldn't even answer it.
That is very good.
And we lose our sense of humor on this stuff, you know. I don't know who thought of that, but that's the kind of humor that tickles my fancy.
Well, it looks like the stock market's going to tank again today.
Yeah, it's the damn virus. You know, and I know how easy you get virus, Alice.
Yeah, it's really, really something. I mean, everybody's 401k is just taking an incredible hit.
See, that's the great thing about going broke. You don't worry about that stuff anymore. It's like you're on your deathbed and somebody says, "Guess what? We're all going to die in a week." That doesn't faze me.
Yeah,
oh boy. I got to do a reset here at 7:27. You're listening to Mornings with Bob Marrone. I'm that idiot. This is Radio Westchester. But so what? Anything else on your mind before I rail? I've been railing against the universe this morning. I'm just really upset. You know, by the way, I have a weather service, you know, and
Good.
They got the temperature wrong. I came in here today and my cookies almost fell off. It was so freaking cold. I had like, you know, now what is the temperature when you've got like you can see the breath coming out of your mouth? It's got to be below freezing, right?
Yeah, it's down. Yeah, sure, it's down around freezing.
No, well then I checked my weather sources and it's 39. I said I ain't buying it. So I want to have a thermometer I keep on the window.
Well, that's reasonable, though. I mean, at least they didn't say it was 50.
No, Vince, I'm telling you. And then you know what I did yesterday because it was so warm and we had a lot of guests in here. I turned off the heat. So now I came in here today, and I wound up having iced coffee that I bought that was fully hot. I don't know. It's Friday. I try to keep it a little lighter on Friday, but now my head hurts from laughing. But I did love that. Hi, I'm Joe Biden. I forgot this message. I thank God I didn't see it during the show because I would have just kept laughing. And occasionally people do that to me. You know, Anthony's the worst. They'll send me a text, and like an idiot, I open it and it'll anyway. So let's see what else is going. Is it just me, or and I said this earlier? Are you sick and tired of 2-page stories over who's going to be the fifth starter for the Mets? Do people really care that much about who's going to be the fifth starter? Am I out of touch now?
I don't know. I don't follow baseball that closely. I mean,
I'm definitely going to ask Jake this. In fact, I think I'm going to ask him now. He just made a coffee pit stop for us, but on the way in, I'm going to put the mic on so he can yell at it because he's over there in the corner. Jake, should people care so much about who the hell the fifth starter is on the Mets that they got to do 2 pages in my favorite sports paper, 2 pages?
Slow news cycle, hence all of our hockey talk.
Well, yeah, that's all as you saw. And because, I mean, fifth in this guy, he's 18 years old. He was born on a small island outside of Madagascar. Has been playing baseball since he was in the womb. He grabbed his mother's kidney and he started throwing it on the other side of the womb. And he's going to be how does this happen, Jay?
Oh, the real story is the Yankees' new $400 million man got roughed up yesterday.
But it's spring training. He's supposed to get roughed up. This is when you get a feel for things. This is foreplay.
Maybe he's not junking the ball up anymore. Maybe he's a fraud.
Maybe. Oh, you see, Jake is our resident contrarian, and
I saw that your boy on the Rangers there. They just signed him with a 7-year contract. Now he's out.
Oh, it pleases you that he got hurt, doesn't it?
I don't know. I don't like to see players get hurt, but It was ironic.
Jake, I'm about to skewer this guest. Are you the Canadian fan? Is this the same team that the Rangers threw a stake through your heart last week? Would that be that team?
It is the same team. Yes. I've been saying it all season. We are god awful. We got to do something. I don't know. Bergevin's got to go. Every year it's the same old, same old. They got to make some changes.
Just threw that in. That's how we care about your Canadians, okay? Oh, man. Okay, well, just a couple of other things. You'll be heading to church this weekend, will you?
I will.
Will all of you be praying that the coronavirus only kills 1 million instead of 2 million?
No, we'll be praying that it kills only a select few, and none of them are us.
And actually, just a little context. Vince, I'm not saying you were an atheist, but a long time not sure which way he was going to swing on the God pendulum, has found the Lord himself, and is a very. But apropos of that, do you ever say to your new pastor, holy pastor, no, listen, I need you to say a prayer for me. After all, you have God's ear and you wear his uniform.
No, but I'm always saying wacky things to her. She and I are good friends, and we serve on another committee together. And
you're good friends with the female pastor?
Yes, she's a wonderful woman. My wife knows her very well.
Oh, that's the old line. My wife knows her. My wife's friends with her. This is right.
But I'm always
communion takes many forms.
Yeah, we're going to have to look at that, in light of the this whole coronavirus thing. Because the way we do it in our church, she literally breaks a loaf of bread and we take a piece and all of that. And I think we're going to probably have to change that procedure a bit.
Oh, you mean you don't have the wafer?
No.
Now that you use real bread.
The real stuff.
Do you know what I used to do? Do you remember that? This is real kid stuff, but it's true. Do you remember the little flying saucer candies with the little pellets in them?
Yeah, I love those things.
Well, I didn't, because they always got stuck to the roof of my mouth, just like when I went to communion.
That's right.
So now,
and you couldn't touch it, so
remember you had to twaddle your tongue at the roof of your mouth, and you couldn't get it down, and you were there with your head down, say, "Oh my God, I can't bite Jesus!" He'll scream.
Yeah, no, you'll choke or something.
But no, because I do remember that. But seriously, do you have wine too?
Yes.
Do you dip?
You dip the bread in it.
Oh, you can't be doing that with this virus.
No, I know.
So you know what you should get? You get those little bottles of wine. Give everybody. You should go out and buy like a bunch of those little like the little dinner rolls. Give everybody a dinner roll and a glass of wine. Can you just? They'll love the what do you call it? The I forget what you call it.
It'll be great if at least from my point of view, if you got a steak along with it too. I mean.
Yeah, I'm going to get myself in trouble if I keep this up. It is 7:33. I just want to give a heads up. In a few minutes, we're going to be. I don't know. I made a mess out of my desk here today. I don't know what's going on. But Vince, thank you very much. Have you any other words of wisdom before we move on?
No, that's it. But just fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be another rough ride on Wall Street today.
Are you worried about your 401k?
Indeed, I am worried.
I'm scared, Norton.
When this first started, I said, all right, there's going to be this dip, and it's going to last a while, and then it's going to rebound. And a few days it did. There were a few days where it was up 1,000 and whatever points. But boy, oh boy, this is really persisting. So I don't know what's going to happen.
Calm down. Take a stress pill. You know what? When you go to church on Sunday, ask the Lord Master for a few favors. I just need this stock to go up. All right, take care, and thanks for your...
Talk to you next week.
Thanks for being a good sport. Vince Russo, everybody. All righty. I'm supposed to leave the music up. That's it. It is 7:34. We're going to go to a very interesting guest in just a few minutes, but first, I have to give the fake news weather again. I'm going to use the official forecast, 39. Scattered clouds, don't buy it, it feels colder. I'm looking at my thermometer, that says 40 because it's also half indoors. Mixed sun and clouds today, late day showers. There may be a snippet of snow. It's not going to amount to very much because the temperature will be 46. Tonight, mostly cloudy, a temperature of 31 degrees. Saturday, lots of sunshine, breezy, 43. Sunday, lots of sunshine and breezy, getting up to 56. You can put your bathing suits on. Now, listen to this Monday. I'm giving you this. It can't be Sunday, but Monday it'll be 65 degrees. You'll love it. Once again, the weather's brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhgc.com. And he'll get embarrassed. It's probably his first time on the radio. No, put those headphones on. We're putting you on. Oh, yeah, put them on. And we shed light on our next subject. He's new to radio, we think, but he's not new to performing. As we move on now into the bottom of the 7 o'clock hour. And, of course, the bottom of the hour is brought to you by Aging Issues Management, the law firm of Payne & Con, Dominic's Fine Cigars, and Plug-in Virtual Reality. My next guest, and I'm going to steal his book from him. Okay. Very interesting fellow. And and we're going to talk with him about his evolution from, in effect, what he used to do to now he's a writer. He's a playwright. Everything from writing music to writing plays. And I'm looking at one of his books, and I think it has to do with his, I like the title of this book. This is going to be fun. Now, if you would, about a fist from the mic, Richard. His name is Richard Cerulli, a local playwright. And we love to take care of our own here, a local playwright who is also, and we did a little bit of research on it. If you go to www.demitaskplayers.com, you get a chance to look into the plays that he's written, where they're performed, find out a little more about him. But please welcome the first time here on Radio Westchester, Richard Cerulli. Good morning, sir. And get on the mic, about a fist away. And you could raise it up. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Good morning. How's everyone?
Everyone is pretty good, but the question is, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine.
Well, I'm looking at this book, and I'm going to hold it up for folks. Up. There we go. They're in a teacup, and it's called Demitas Divorce, an Existential and Erotic Infidelity. Sounds like something that I'd like. But first of all, let's talk a little bit about you. Were you always a playwright? Were you always an artist?
It was always in me.
Just a little closer.
I'm just wired to be an artist, and but it was a slow evolution. You know, when you're young, you start thinking of career, and I became an architect and an engineer, and then actually became an economics professor. And
wait a minute, just stop right there. I got a beautiful woman on the cover of her book. It says existential and erotic, and you were an engineer?
Yeah.
And then you were a professor of numbers?
Yeah.
That's like right side, left side brain stuff, sir.
Oh, definitely. It argues with itself every morning for years. You know?
I bet. So how long did you do the former? How long did you do design, architectural design? Although there is a little leap there, and economics. How long did you do that?
Well, what I did is, I was always very good at expressing myself and writing. And when I got divorced, there was an opportunity for me to do what I wanted to do.
How long you married?
30 years.
Oh, God. Okay. Now, so for those 30 years, you had that more conventional career.
Correct.
Okay. Where'd you teach?
Oh, I taught at Marist College.
Okay. All right.
St. Thomas Aquinas.
So, okay. All right. So you taught then, and of course you have a PhD. Now, is your PhD in?
It's in business.
Oh, it isn't.
Yeah.
God,
Pretty boring stuff.
No, but this is because the work you do now is not boring. We're talking about plays and music and books and eroticism and all of that. So you get divorced. Now, you told me a little bit when we spoke on the phone, but Demitas Divorce. People are saying, what in God's name that has to do? But is this where you met your wife, or where you ended the divorce?
Actually, the term Demitas, which means small cup.
Right. Stay on the mic. You'll get used to us.
When I got divorced, one of the first things I did is I got involved in the artist community up in Poughkeepsie.
All right. Now, this is something for people listening. Was it always in your gut, and your divorce, now after that happened, you said, now I'm going to do what I want to do? Is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Okay.
It's very fair
So
statement.
take us there.
All right. So, and just by some act of synchronicity, I find myself on the executive director at the Barrett Arts Center immediately.
Immediately? How
Yeah.
did you? Oh, we want to go get a business major to run an art center. You must have been dabbling.
Yeah, I mean, I always had, used to do sketches and things like that,
Okay.
photography, and a very creative person. And what would happen is all the artists would go to this restaurant called the Demitasse.
Okay.
And there were just fond memories there. I used to date there and met a lot of very interesting women there.
Artsy women. I'm going to get myself in trouble now, so just keep talking. Robert,
Okay.
shut up. That's okay.
And there were just some very fond memories. And I lived up in the Hudson Valley for a while. And Cold Spring was a community that I really, really enjoyed. And a lot of fond memories there. So when I wrote my second book, I thought, let's take a look at this from a very existential point of view. And
Existential meaning what? I know what it means, but what does it mean in the context of your work?
well, existentialism is how you make it quick is what it attempts to do is fill the void where philosophy and religion fall short. Now, that's not a criticism.
No, I get to make criticisms every day. I do understand that. Where are we all headed when this is done?
Yeah, I mean,
ahead.
religion and philosophy tells us how to behave good. It just never tells us how to behave when we deal with people that misbehave, and how do you really handle life. So, in a nutshell, existentialism is trying to go from existing to an essence of life.
Okay, continue, please.
So with the book, I looked at this and I said, people fall in love, then they fall out of love, and it's so I took romance and eroticism, and it's not a book on eroticism.
No, I understand that.
But it makes the point because what's happening is the eroticism is the protagonist because these are two people in failed marriages.
But yet they're drawn to each other.
They're drawn to each other. They're baby boomers in the 90s. They're hitting middle age. They're like, am I going to miss out on life?
Hold that thought there just for a second, because for our listeners, an awful lot of people, baby boomers, they may still be married, they may be recently single, they may be divorced. They're going through what you're talking about
Exactly.
right now, and they're listening. So continue, please.
Well, the book is, I won't say it's a self-help book. It just takes a very good look at when you navigate life and you find yourself in this position. Both people are drawn to it. Now, the book says infidelity ? Because you have to read through the book to understand that little.
Or is it infidelity?
Is it a fidelity
is the
or
implied
not?
question,
There's,
yes.
there's a lot. It's a deep book, but it's a very easy read.
It's interesting when you do that. I'm sure you saw the movie Eyes Wide Shut.
Yes.
Did you? And a lot of people don't understand that movie.
Yeah.
They think that it's a movie about sex, but it's a movie about fidelity.
Yes.
And that's the whole point of it. That's why the password is Fidelio.
Yeah.
But what the movie tried to cover, and it didn't get enough good criticism, and that's why I get your point here, is that everybody's tempted, or that kind of eroticism is in everyone. It weaves through your life, and it's what you do about it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and a lot of people didn't get that about that movie.
Yeah, and in this book, I mean, there are two opposites. Elia is a very sophisticated architect.
Yeah.
Academic. He's got the good moral compass. He wants to do things right. And NES, the counterpart, she's an actress, a libertine. Elia is spiritual, and she's questioning if she's either an atheist or an agnostic.
That
what she-
sounds like me. Go ahead.
But they meet, and there's this chemistry, and they're both looking to get their last hurrah.
All right. Well, we're going to come back to that in a minute, because I want this section today to be about you, and then we'll talk about the book towards the end of this. And of course, we're going to have you back. What people are finding interesting, okay, this guy was a successful architect and a college professor and all of that. Now you're writing books and doing plays. Let's talk a little bit more about that metamorphosis, because that metamorphosis, if I've gotten to understand you by my research, this book is the product of that.
Yes,
And so is your play work.
exactly.
So now do you have children?
Yes,
How many?
two daughters,
What ages?
46 and 41.
Well, that'll do. That means you had to live through the teenage years of two daughters.
Yes.
You're lucky you still have your liver. Okay.
little
well,
of it.
well, bless them both.
Thank you.
And how did they deal with the divorce?
It was difficult for them.
Yeah, I bet.
Because they were, I got married young, so even though they were older, it still left a very bitter taste. The wounds of that divorce have never really been healed.
They
for my
never
children.
totally heal. Well, I'm sorry. I don't want to pry
That's fine.
into that, but I'm trying to get a sense for what made you you.
Yeah.
But still, you go on with your wife. Is your ex-wife remarried, or is she gone on with her life? And
We've both gone on with our lives, and
Okay,
we
good.
really have very little interaction, but
Okay.
no hard feelings.
okay, good. Now, so you're divorced. You look ahead. Now, you didn't write the book first. What'd you do first? I think you said you
Wrote a play.
headed up this art group, but you wrote a play. What play did you write?
The first play that I wrote and produced was Via Dolorosa.
Okay.
And what really prompted me to go into writing plays is just like a statistic.
Did you see that, by the way? So you have every right to make fun of me when everyone else does. I was about to drink coffee with the lid on. Well, at least you knew I was listening. I'm sorry. Forgive me. And I want to remind folks, our guest is Richard Cerulli. He's an author, a playwright, the director of a wonderful troupe called the Demitas Players. And they do plays right here in Westchester. And he writes most of them. And I guess you do perform
All of them.
All of you perform in them as well?
I don't perform. I prefer to be behind the scenes.
Oh, okay. I was in one movie, but I get killed at the end. Imagine someone killing me, I get strangled in the end.
But that makes for good movies.
Thanks a lot. There are a lot of people
personally,
listening.
but,
There are a lot of people listening. Say, can we strangle him in the next one? All right. So continue.
Yeah.
So what did you do first?
Well, what happened through life is I've lost a lot of friends through mental illness, either through suicide
Yeah.
or they fall down the rabbit hole. And what would happen is I became very astute to mental illness because I grew up with a close family member who had a very serious mental disorder.
Sorry.
A very brilliant person. And when I just watched that person and how destructive that person was towards me,
Towards you as well.
yeah, I was singled out. And but I was wise enough to know there's, you don't listen to the tongue, you listen to the heart. And this left a big impression.
That's a great statement.
Thank you.
Because there are people that can be mean to you, but you see through them.
You have to see through
And you
them.
know what's really going on in there.
Exactly, and that's what prompted me to this. So I came across a very sad statistic that it's a government statistic, and it said that only 17% of adult Americans qualify for being mentally healthy. A very sad statement, and that really resonated with me because what would happen so many times, you'd be talking to a husband, wife, friends, whatever, and you notice something's amiss.
Mm-hmm.
And if you ever go up to them and say, I love you, everything else, you ever think of getting help?
That's a hard thing to do. But yeah.
You will get mind your own business. Who do you think you are? And you just watch that person deconstruct. And I've watched it as a rerun over and over.
Although, how
again.
much of that, too, a lot of it has to do with definitions. A lot
Yes.
of it has to do with semantics. For example, we have the justifiably so spectrum for people who are autistic. Well, for both political, spiritual, good intentions, all kinds of reasons, that spectrum has expanded to include people that are just a little different. And
Yeah.
that's all we would have said. Where is when do we apply the label of mental illness, taking that metaphor, when do we apply the label of mental illness to that?
Well,
To that dynamic, if you will.
Yeah, what the plays really attempt to do is to bring it out
Excuse
and
me.
let that be the third person identifying the illness. Because what will happen is you can't go to a person and say, I think, because you'll lose a friendship and it won't work. But when we did the first play, it dealt with a mother who had Munchausen's by proxy.
Okay,
disorder.
by the way, Munchausen's, folks, is that illness where people want to be, they draw attention to themselves by saying that they're taking care of someone who has an awful disease. Yes.
Yeah. And
Sort of like a martyr kind of thing.
exactly,
Yeah.
very good. And it's so we did this play centered around this person, how that behavior acts, and when we did the first play, I had a lot of psychiatrists there, mental health people from the mental health community,
Good for you.
philosophers, and it was my first play. We had a very good turnout. We got great reviews, And what made me happy was that a woman comes up to me after the show and said, you know, all these years I thought I had the problem. You made it very clear that it was my mother who had the problem.
Whomever, right, yeah.
And she was so toxic to me. And I spent years in therapy not believing I was a good person. And this just made me realize that maybe our parents can make mistakes.
Oh, they all do. I think psychiatry and life is filled with that.
Yeah.
And the larger question is escaping that.
Exactly.
Escaping that, you know, as you know, one of the things that drew me to your background was my own fight with serious depression.
Yeah.
And those subtleties, like you mentioned before about when you challenge someone who has a mental illness, or you're thinking you want them to get help, right away they close the book. They cover up.
Yeah.
Well, early in therapy, you do that.
Yes.
You know, the doctor that saved my life used to say, Bob, as soon as we go there, you just want to undo it. You want to make like, no, you can't. It happened, or these things are there. You know, the classic thing is, were you angry at your mother, and then you recoil. Oh, I love my mother. I didn't say you didn't love your mother.
Yeah.
I just want to know if you were angry about it. They're separate things.
Yes.
And then so that whole dynamic is huge, and people have a hard time making that separation from what may have happened in their youth or what may have happened as a child. They may think it means I hate my mother if I say I'm angry. So you're not allowed to express that anger, and you go on through the rest of your life, or whatever the case may be.
Exactly. And, you know, and that's what we were trying to do with these plays, is to have, you know, to basically say, well, there's two things. You have the person who has mental illness, who
Right.
didn't choose to have it. So we want to take the taboo away from that. So people
Wonderful.
could be more, you know, I have this illness, let's bring it to the table. And don't look at me as if I'm, you know, if I'm an alien, you know. So we really attempted to do this, and I'm very blessed because I have a couple of key troop members who are psychiatrists and or psychologists.
But
and
that's
social-
wonderful.
And so when we do these plays, I'll pick out a certain disorder and build a character around them. And
But you must be, if I may, you must be pretty skilled and knowledgeable about the different kinds of disorders, whether they be personality disorders or schizophrenia, depression, OCD.
quite a bit.
Yeah, I would think. Okay.
Yeah,
I want to remind people this very learned guest is Richard Cirilli. He, of course, spent most of his career. He was a college professor, but now he is a playwright and author and leads an acting troupe. Back to your, because there's no way we can do this in a half hour. We're going to get you back next week for an
Fine.
hour spot.
Perfect.
But because this is, we'll tease everybody today. How long are your plays, and does everyone deal with mental illness in some way?
Yeah, well, the plays, it's a negative compliment. They all have, they're very deep plays, and they don't have happy endings. Now, I do that for a very specific reason, because there's a psychological profile of some people that say everything's going to be all right. And they'll deny the illness, as we discussed.
I thoroughly understand.
So what we do is we have this event and we take it to this point. And what I'm trying to tell the audience is, if you insert yourself at the right time, if there's a loved one, whatever it is, and you address this, you could prevent this from happening. Because if you put a happy ending at the end of that story,
Yeah.
people say, I don't have to get help.
You see, that's a great paradox, because I think when we were preparing for this, and I was telling you a little bit about my own background, whenever I give a talk about depression, there's this, inevitably a moderator will say something like, isn't this one of the best things that ever happened to you? Look, it led to this whole other life. And my answer is no. I said, it's so horrible that I would prefer not to have had it, and to be perhaps less gifted in some other way. In other words, I don't want to put a romantic spin on it.
Understood.
But I do want people to understand, though, and that you can get well, and what you have to do to get there.
Exactly.
So it's a very, very narrow corridor to go down.
Yeah, it is. And so when I do my writings and whatever it is, and especially the plays, is you want to highlight that. You want to say, look, this is life, and
I'm so glad you said that. Go ahead. No, please continue.
and and you're going to come across this either being a victim, or you're going to have to deal with that person in some way. And what we really attempt to do is, well, a number of things we try to attempt to do is that, you won't want the person who has a clinical depression or a serious mental disorder. And what happens is when they start talking to the children, if it's a parent or whatever it is, they actually convey that type of feeling into their children or their loved ones around them. And they become victims on a very behavioral level. Doesn't even have to be a genetic level. So they're raised in this very dysfunctional home. And if you're not astute enough to look at this and say, something's wrong.
Can I add something for the for the time ahead that we will do this? And you mentioned it, it's life. I'm going to try and express this and get your reaction. One of the things that needs to be understood about what you do is, and about dealing with mental illness, is it's not extra life. It's not beyond the daily loves and work and pain and strife. For people who have these issues, it's baked, it's in there, if you will, and I don't mean DNA clinically, but it's within the construct of life that all this stuff happens.
Yes.
As my doctor once said to me, you're here today because it is who you are and what you are, and it's a part of, this is where you are now.
Yes.
So that it's about the loves of your life. It's about your relationships with people. So, because a lot of people think that when you write a play or something about mental illness, that you're trying to separate the illness out from life. You're not.
No, I bring it into the mainstream.
It's absolutely integrated with everything that you do, and it's there.
Exactly.
Good for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I've just lost so many people to it in so many different ways, and it just became just a sad rerun. You just see this behavior, and you say, if I insert myself, it's not going to work.
Why, though? Let's get to your motivation. And again, we're going to be talking more about this book next week. But,
okay.
But you could have written plays. You could have used your insight to write plays about any number of things. What drove you to do this?
Well, it was... as I said, I had a very close family member who was a very brilliant person and was afflicted by this. And in the first story, Via Dolorosa, and the reason why I picked it is the woman's name was Dolores.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And what happened is she had a very terrible life. And when I did the play, it starts off where she's the antagonist, boo, hiss, boo, hiss, boo, hiss, when they watch what she does to her children, her family, and everything else. I mean, what an evil person. And then there's a reason for it, because the play reveals that she was molested by her father. And all of a sudden, the antagonist...
Oh, God becomes a protagonist. No,
and so with that, the audience is watching this, and what I'm trying to say is when we look at people, take a good look at them. Don't take a bias. Don't judge it from your perspective.
Just to switch this over to news item, every once in a while you read or a movie will come out, like the famous one now about the woman, the bunny boiler, what's her name? Oh, God. I forget now the name of it. Come on, Robert. Oh, yes, Fatal Attraction.
Yeah.
Borderline personality is most common. Not that it doesn't affect men, it does.
Yes.
But it's more common among women because women are more likely to be molested as children.
Yes.
And so when you come across this so-called angry borderline personality, almost always there is such a heartbreaking story behind that it'll crush you.
Yeah.
You do good work, my friend. It almost borders on the religious, which is a whole other thing about the existential comment you make, because at the heart of a lot of this too is forgiveness and redemption. Before I let you go today, what do you have coming up?
Okay, well, we actually started doing movies now, and we're doing it, and they're going to be presented on the cable, and we're going to do these little short.
When are they coming?
They'll be starting in April.
Okay, so good. So we still have time to talk about that next week. All right. Tell people right now, I'd like them to know where your website is, where your troupe is.
Okay.
Now, remember, he's going to be back next week. We'll let you know, folks, for an hour. We're going to talk about Demitask Divorce, An Existential and Erotic Infidelity by Richard Cerulegan, and he's our guest. But now, I just want people to leave because they've got to be saying, who is this guy? How do I find out more? Or maybe even how do I get involved? Give me the basics, your website, where your theater is,
Okay.
and how to get a hold of you.
Okay, I would, I encourage people to see our website. It's www.demitaskplayers.com, and you'll see excerpts from our performances. My plays are there. There's excerpts from the plays, my poems, and readings from my short stories. And it gives an overview of our troupe, our mission, our history, and we're Westchester based. And we usually perform at the White Plains Performing Arts Center or Whippoorwill Theater, who I want to thank them for all their help and support over the years. And also, all my book sales from Demitask Divorce will be going to fight mental illness. So I encourage people to buy the book. Hopefully they enjoy the story because it has some redeeming value to it. But more or less, anything I make from it will go to support mental illness. So I appeal to everyone to help me assist the humanity in distress.
Well, good for you. God bless you. And I'm not even terribly religious, but that's appropriate. Richard Cerulli, folks, we'll let you know. We are going to put him on long form next week for 1 hour. We'll let you know when it is. I can't tell you. Well, we've talked a little bit how near and dear this is to my heart, sir.
Yes.
You're doing wonderful work, and I'd like to get involved.
Thank you.
Richard Cerulli, you will hear from him. Now we go from music from theatrics to sports. Take the seat of honor, Jake. Wow, that was interesting. That's a great line. Richard Cerulli just pointed out a line in his book, Falling in Love is a Cruel Game. We call it happiness. Richard Cerulli. Richard, thank you very much. Guess who's in the house? He's back. The inimitable, the only Jake Schaefer. He even has his own music. It's time for our sports update with Jake and also see how he's held me accountable. I don't know if I had a good game the other night, but this week's Jake segment is brought to you by Dominic's Fine Cigars, licensed retailer with a big selection, including Arturo Fuente, Padrons, and more. Dominic's Fine Cigars, located on Boston Post Road in Larchmont. All righty, Jake, welcome home. Callis is going to join us in a little bit, too. But first, what's going on, my friend?
Not too much. You took a little step backwards on Wednesday night with your
What was I, 1 and
picks.
2 or something like that?
You were 4 and 6. Intern Nick was 5 and 5. So you are 28 and 23 on the year. Nick, the intern, is 29 and 21.
It's interesting, though. We're pretty running neck and neck. It's
Very close.
pretty interesting. Do you want to do me now? Why did I even say that to him? God, I don't understand. But go ahead.
All right. A few games tonight. The Blues are on the road against the Devils.
Okay. And Steve, you stay right there, sir. Go ahead. Yeah, we're doing my picks now, Steven. Go ahead.
Any ideas on that one?
Say that again?
The Blues are on the road against the Devils.
Sorry, Devs. Blues.
They are favored. Red Wings at home against the Blackhawks. No line.
Hawkies.
The Golden Knights on the road against the Jets. Golden Knights slight favorites.
Jets.
Flames at home against the Coyotes. Flames favored.
Flames.
Avalanche on the road favored against the Canucks.
Canucks.
Maple Leafs on the road, favored against the Ducks.
Oh, man, the Leafs are so... Leafs.
All right.
All righty, folks, and those are
favorites, three underdogs.
Bobby's picks of the week. I'm lagging a little behind the young boy because I went for too many underdogs the other day. Welcome. We talk sports in this segment, and today we had a little bit of a rejiggered schedule to accommodate a special guest, but we would not be happy if we didn't have Jake and Steve Callis together. Steve, as you know, is the editor of sports for the Westchester County Post.com. He also, you'll find him on the Philly Fanatic Radio. He is a writer. Now narrates videographies as well, and of course a sports broadcaster. Please welcome Steve Callis. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning, Bob. Great to be with you as always, but I hope you're going to make it up to my boss because this is like the second time this has happened, and she's more interesting than I am. And you've got Jake.
Hey, no. We did sports today. Yeah, but I already rebooked your boss for Monday and Friday next.
Oh, okay. I take it back then. I didn't know that.
made it up. Look, you think I'm an idiot?
No.
I go way back. No, I go way back with your boss. But you know, radio, you have certain guests, and you have to, you have a finite number of spots. So, and
absolutely.
What did you drop, Jake?
Pamphlet.
Okay, Jake is over here writing notes furiously, but I've got to ask you, what the hell's going on where I've got to see 2 pages of sports about who's going to be the backup, second pitcher, 7th starter, may start once every fortnight. What the hell? I mean, is this...
Well, I think Jake said it best, the end of February, early March. It's kind of a dead time. But it's interesting because my theory on pitching is, and I don't know what yours is or Jake's is, but no longer do you need 5 starting pitchers. These guys are so fragile nowadays. You need 6, and the question really to me is, do you need 7? And it's hard to carry that many because of all the relievers you carry. But when you have Waka, Porcello, and Matz, 3 proven pitchers in the major leagues, not great so much as late, but when you have those 3 guys fighting for the 2 final spots, to me, that's an embarrassment of riches because these guys at one time or another have been higher than a number 5 starter to me.
Jake?
I like Waka a lot. He was a big recruit, prized prospect coming up with the Cardinals, and I guess he's thrown over 95 this spring. I think he's going to have a really good year, and I think he'll get one of those spots. But I also like the idea of the opener. I think that's a nice change of pace for some teams, and they want to give some guys some rest. I like the idea of the opener.
Okay, now let's go to that. There was a piece the other day with Seth Lugo. It was not exactly crazy about the idea of being called, quote, the opener. If this evolves, this is going to change the nature of baseball forever. There won't be starters anymore.
I don't think it would wipe out the starters completely, but I just think it's a nice
why not?
Strategy.
See, why don't we just go right now and think out of the box? Maybe the whole notion of a starting pitcher, because right now, if you do 5 innings, thank you, goodbye.
Who would you rather have start a big game for you, Justin Verlander or just some knock-around lefty?
But give me Justin Verlander for 3. Why should I even go into a 4th inning with him?
That's crazy.
See, what I'm challenging here, and I'm doing this for intellectual purposes. I'm not sure I even agree with what I'm saying, but a lot of sports are constructs. They're man-made constructs. They're not the natural order of things. Why not? For example, why? And I'm going to ask Steve to react to this. But doesn't baseball change its salary structure a little bit and have a defensive team that's completely different from the offensive team? Steven?
Well, I've always thought since the DH that you were moving towards maybe all defense, all offense, like in football, for example.
Yeah.
Obviously, that hasn't happened. But in terms of Justin Verlander, why don't you just throw him for 3? I think the answer is with the opener, again, invented by the Tampa Bay Rays, who have always been kind of strapped for cash, etc. I think the theory is you want to go through the first time of the order with an opener because nowadays, analytically, Bob, you take out your starter after he's been through the lineup twice. The numbers are always worse for the guy when he goes through the lineup the 3rd time.
Of course.
And frankly, I think if you went back and did 50s, 60s, the glory days, Gibson, Koufax, Marichal, Whitey Ford. If you went back and looked at those guys, I'm willing to guess, that they wouldn't be so great third time through either, but they gutted it out. And the game I would give as an example, which I didn't see, but you'll remember, Bob, is the '64 World Series Game 7. Bob Gibson gave up 2 home runs in the 9th inning and
Sure
won the
do.
game 7-5.
Sure do.
And that would not ever happen ever today. And you don't have a starting pitcher. Well, I shouldn't say you don't have a starting pitcher of Gibson's magnitude. You have some great ones. But Verlander, for example, if you're going to pitch him for 3, I want him to go as far as he can go. He's the one modern guy to me who paces early and can throw 97 in the 7th inning. Most of these guys have been taught to throw as hard as they can for as long as they can.
You know, now you use the term gutted out. It's interesting as I look at the evolution of pitching guys. The only person now in baseball who really has to gut it out is the poor soul who comes in and has to pitch to 3 guys if he doesn't have it. My point is the whole notion of a pitcher being a competitor is being it's not being eliminated, but it's being diminished because of statistics. In other words, a pitcher gutting out a game is a part of baseball that we're not going to see anymore.
Correct, and you can thank essentially, I think, Tony La Russa for that, because now it's gone from what he used to do to what it is today, which is everyone, are people calling into the Met dugout last year to tell when to make a pitching change? I don't know, but that's what it seemed like at times, because the GMs now want a manager who's kind of wallflower, if you will, think Art Howe, for example, and that's totally changed the game. To me, that's why a guy like Buck Showalter has trouble getting a job, for example. These older guys who are tougher are kind of on the way out. And when you say players manager or players coach in basketball, for example, you're really talking about guys who, in my view, are kind of softies in that they're not going to take a stand. They're not going to be John Tortorella or Mike Keenan before him, or Buck Showalter, frankly. Those guys are starting to disappear, and I don't think they're coming back anytime
Well,
soon.
some of them do embrace both. I mean, some of them seem to adapt. Iron Mike didn't. Tortorella did. I think that the former Yankee manager is now in Philly. I think he did. But another question apropos of this: do you think that pitchers what's the thing I'm thinking of? Why not have an Aroldis Chapman come in, a different Aroldis Chapman every inning for 9 innings then, if we're going down this route?
I think it'll be really
because
fascinating what the Mets decide to do with their bullpen. I don't know what Diaz is going to be. Diaz was so incredible a couple years ago, but I don't know if he's made for New York. I love Lugo. I think
he could be the Ed Whitson of the Mets.
I think he's the fireman. If they're in trouble in the 5th inning, 2 on, 1 out, close game, you need the game. I would go to Lugo in those real tight spots and hope Betances can close, and then maybe use Diaz in kind of the lower stress 7th, 8th innings. I don't trust Diaz anymore.
Steve?
Well, you can't have 9 Aroldis Chapmans because you don't have 9 Aroldis Chapmans. I know what your theory is, that you could throw 9 guys for 1 inning. The other problem with that is, frankly, and you know this again from years ago, Bob, 4-man rotation.
Oh, right.
You had like 7 or 8 or 9 pitchers on the roster, and today you have literally 11 or 12 or 13. And for some reason, I assume this is the owners wanting to keep their salaries down. You don't have, it's been like 25 or 26 guys forever. There should be like 30 guys on the Major
it's
League
funny
team
you
now,
say this.
If you're going to have 12 bullpen guys.
You ever go to like a AA game or even lower than that? If you go to like the independent league, even though a starter may be brilliant for 4 innings, you almost see everybody in the bullpen. It's like 10 pitches a game. Question for you, Stephen, being involved a little longer than Jake and I. How long have the managers or the pitching coaches been calling pitches? And when did they take that away? I mean, every time I go to a game, I see the catcher looking in the dugout.
Yeah, no, I think that's been going on for a long time now. This is not Yogi Berra in the 60s or Thurman Munson in the 70s. I think it's been going on for a long time. I'll say at least 20, 25 years.
Now, does that mean Garrett Cole doesn't pitch what he wants to pitch?
Well, he always has the ability to shake off the catcher, and that doesn't happen a lot, but it does happen, especially at the higher level guys.
Boy, I am old. How the hell can somebody in the dugout know what I have today and what pitch I'm going to throw, up and in or low and outside? I mean, it's nuts.
Well, I agree. I mean, it's a great question, but why do you recall in the old days of the NFL, the quarterbacks, whatever you think of quarterbacks today and how great they are, Johnny Unitas called his own plays.
No, I understand
that. You can check off at the line, but nowadays everything is micromanaged from up above or on the sidelines or in the dugout.
I agree.
That's just the way it is.
I agree, but when it comes to pitching, and maybe because I was a pitcher, maybe I'm having trouble getting the ball up and into it. Maybe I got to go with a low and outside pitch for the rest of the day. Maybe my breaking ball is not sharp. And I can't rely on somebody. That's nuts. But I guess that's what it is.
Well, again, you have the right as a pitcher to shake a guy off, and in today's game, you better be successful.
Wow. Well, who's usually calling the pitches? The manager or the pitching coach?
The ones I've seen are mostly, you got a guy like Girardi certainly called him when he was a Yankee manager, but he's also a catcher. Socia called him for the Angels, but he was also a catcher. And as you know, a lot of the great managers are catchers, supposedly the smartest guy on the field, the only guy who can see everybody, every position in front of him. So I think it's generally the manager. If your bench coach is, who is that great catcher who was a bench coach for years? No, obviously Bench is one of the greatest ever. But no, there was a bench coach who was a pitcher, maybe Pena. I can see his face. I can't remember his name. I would have let him. I don't know if he did, but I would have let him call the pitches, for example. But that's been going on for a long time now, Bob.
Nuts. Just I can't. It's anathema to me. But I guess you guys know what you're talking about. 816. We're with Steve Callis and Jake Schaefer talking sports. Steven. And I need you and Jake to help me because football is not my forte at all. Everybody's running around about the football draft. What are distill it up? It's like the early presidential primaries. Who should we really be looking at in terms of the Jets and the Giants? Jake?
I think the Giants are going to go defense. I think they actually will trade their pick. I think they're going to try and load up on picks. I think they're picking 4th, and I believe they'll trade that to go drop down in the first round and just accumulate picks. Jets need pretty much everything. I think they'll probably do something on the line. Maybe there's some good wide receivers this year, so maybe they'll get Darno a weapon. It'll be interesting to see what they do though. There's a lot of. This will be a good draft. It's taking place in the water in Las Vegas this year.
What do you mean in the water?
It's a pool.
I was going to say a pool because Las Vegas is landlocked, for God's sakes.
No, it's going to be the stage is in a pool, and you're going to have to...
Good grief. What about you, Steve? What do you think?
Well, I think the Giants obliterated their defense 2 seasons ago, and Gettleman still hasn't explained it. That famous, I got a plan, I don't have to tell you what the plan is, hasn't really worked out that well. So I think that they have to go total defense because, again, they let all their guys leave or traded them. It was just bizarre to me, and they've turned themselves into a poor defensive team by simply getting rid of 4 guys that they had on defense.
By attrition,
the Jets, I agree with...
No, by attrition, just letting them go. Yeah. Hey, quickly, I got to change gears in the interest of time. Does anybody know what happened with Spike Lee?
He's trying to get in some entrance that he didn't have access to. That's not for the public.
Yeah.
That he...
Oh.
I can tell you it was the employees' entrance as opposed to the VIP entrance for fans, and Spike seemed to think he could just walk in there, and he's got some capital there. You would think he's been a season ticket holder forever, but there is a specific VIP entrance at the Garden that's supposed to be for season ticket holders who are VIPs like Spike Lee. I don't know why it would be such a big deal. But again, it's just one of these petty things that Dolan gets into with Charles Oakley, for example, and now with Spike Lee.
Marv Albert.
The chant that Marv Albert.
Yeah, help me. What happened with Marv Albert? What happened? I didn't know that Marv Albert wasn't welcome at the Garden. This man created. Yes, this is an icon.
I think years ago, Marv Albert was critical, as is his wont, was critical when criticism was needed on Nick telecast many years ago, and again, Dolan just didn't like that. He wants everything to be, rosy. Here comes Leon Rose now, and just be patient with us. Well, how long can Knick fans be patient for? This has been a disaster for a very long time. So when you start getting the whole Garden chanting, sell the team, he can't throw 17,000 people out, but he can pick his spots. And Marv maybe the greatest basketball announcer ever. And I would say to you, Bob, one of the greatest hockey announcers
He
ever.
was
People
the
forget
best.
how long he did the Rangers.
And a beauty.
I think he speaks his mind, as he should. He's one of the most intelligent broadcasters ever, knows the sport better than most, which is the advantage he has. Plus, yes, and what you said, kick, save, and the beauty, he's got some sayings that are legendary now. So I think that's the problem. To not invite him back for the 50th anniversary is a disgrace, of course, and hopefully that can change before that happens.
Hopefully so. Hey, listen, where are you appearing this week? I've got to get to, what are these people doing? Go ahead. I've got a guest coming up. Where are you appearing this week?
Yeah, I'm doing my podcast this afternoon with Joe Stazak. That'll be up at WestchesterCountyPost.com. I'll be on 97.5 The Fanatic Sunday at 2:10 p.m. And we've also shot a couple of new videos this week that hopefully will be up this weekend. And that's about it for this weekend. But I was hoping just to tell you that Zibanejad, in addition to the 5 goals, I knew Pavlich. I did not know Don Murdoch. I guess you did.
Yeah.
But
the spoon.
Before he had 5 goals, they put up a graphic on the Ranger game last night that he became the 6th player in Rangers history to score a goal in 9 games over a 10-game span, and that goes back to Gene Rattel and Andy Bathgate and guys you know, Bob. But also it goes back to 1930 and Frank Boucher, who you also know is the greatest Ranger of all time.
Yes.
We'll talk about that another time.
I did not know Frank Boucher in the but see, did you see him stick that in, Jake? A little bit to poke me with a sticker.
That's Steve.
Thank you, Steve Callis, everyone. It is always our pleasure, sir. Jake, I'm going to do better. We've got it. Jake, you know a lot about technology. Are you a geek?
No.
Oh, good, because I got a guy coming on, or a woman coming on to talk about 5G in a moment. All righty. Jake Schaefer is, of course, our man about town. We've got a few other things to talk about. Andre Smith is coming up. We'll be with that person in a moment. Here we go. Yeah, I got that. Got that. Thank you, Jake. Hey, folks, I'm sorry. We're moving on to the next thing. You caught us in the middle here of a little bit of backstage management. I'm sure the person I'm hearing from is Andrea Smith, award-winning technology reporter. Good morning. How are you?
Hey, good morning. I'm fine. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm sorry that you had trouble connecting on our other line, but we are here now.
Excellent.
5G. Now, I want you to understand what you're dealing with here. I have wonderful technology in this studio, but all I understand are the buttons I'm supposed to press. You're dealing with a functional idiot. So now you got to help.
I think I remember that from last time we chatted.
And yes, and you helped me through it. Now, 5G, I keep hearing about it, but when is it really going to impact us? And tell us what that is. And again, I want to remind people, Andrea Smith has been with us before. She's an award-winning tech expert, and she does all kinds of stuff on TV, radio, and we're graced to have her. Help me.
Well, I'm so glad to be here helping you. So let me tell you first, it's complicated.
Oh, no, not another woman telling me it's complicated. What's his name?
It's complicated and it's a little geeky, but here's what you need to know. Not all 5G is created equal.
Okay.
There are 3 types of 5G. This part's easy. Low, mid, and high band 5G.
Oh, no, size matters. I knew it. Go ahead.
Where you live and what wireless provider you use is what's going to determine the 5G that's available to you.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, it's in different places, depending where you live, depending who you use, that's what you got. So for instance, if you're a T-Mobile customer, you're in luck, buddy, because T-Mobile has built out the first and only nationwide 5G network. That means anywhere you live across the country, T-Mobile is there. Its 600 megahertz low-band 5G network is in more than 5,000 cities across the country, continuing to grow because 5G keeps expanding. Plus, they also have high band or millimeter wave hotspots of super fast coverage in parts of 7 cities.
Wow. So what you're telling us, it matters who the provider is. Now, I realize you have a horse in the
Absolutely.
race, but that is also why you're here. Who has the best coverage right now for 5G? And then tell us what 5G can do for us.
Okay, so right now, best coverage for 5G is T-Mobile because it is the first and only nationwide 5G network.
Okay,
That's a fact.
what does it do for
Now,
me?
what is it
does
gonna
it
do
stir
for
my
you?
coffee? Does it give me
It's-
Kate Upton's phone number? What does it do?
What it's going to do for you is it's going to make all the things you do, if you used technology, perhaps in your smart home, on your smartphone, it's going to just make it faster. So in some instances, depending on that low, mid, or high range, it's going to give you 20% faster speed than your 4G network that you're getting right now.
Oh, I need that.
And those super fast millimeter wave hotspots that T-Mobile has in parts of 7 cities is just 100 times faster than what you have right now. So just think about everything you do with technology and how much faster. So say you want to download a movie before you get on a plane really quick, you're going to be able to do that in a matter of seconds.
Okay, Andrea, here's where I need your
got
help.
that.
I want you to add some context. First of all, when will the whole country be wired up for 5G, or is that going to take decades, or what? No,
That's going to take time because think about it. Not even the whole country is wired up for 4G yet, right? That's just something that's going to take time. So again, it's really going to depend on your provider and of course where you live. I live right outside New York City, so I've got everything available to me,
Oh,
right?
that's just like
but
us.
If you're
We're
in the
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
if you're in Middle America, you know, sometimes it takes more just to get really good 4G coverage. So this is just, as I said, depending on where you live, what you got. Right now, some wireless providers only have 5G coverage in parts of some cities.
Okay.
Now,
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm just saying others are more comprehensive. Like I mentioned, T-Mobile with their nationwide 5G network. If you are on T-Mobile or considering moving to T-Mobile and you're going to go buy a new smartphone, well, now might be the time to consider
that's
upgrading
where I
to
wanted
a
to go.
5G-enabled phone.
We're here in New York, and what if I want to buy a 5G phone? Who's got a 5G phone?
Okay, great question. So
course.
right now, Samsung just launched their new Samsung Galaxy S20 5G smartphones. And these are really next-gen devices with high-end specs. There's a whole new camera system that combines artificial intelligence with a larger image sensor, great, stunning photo quality. More important, their new S20 Plus and S20 Ultra are the first smartphones in the U.S. that can tap into all these 5G bands.
No kidding.
So again, it really depends on the phone you get. These are the latest, greatest phones. And if you're a T-Mobile customer, the great news is they don't charge you more for 5G access.
Is that right?
Other wireless providers do include it in their higher end, but let's say you have the T-Mobile Essentials plan, 2 lines, $90 a month, plus tax, 5G included, which is such a great deal.
And this is the new Samsung Galaxy. You know, I have a compliment for you. The last time you were on and you were talking about a new phone, a listener, right after you got off the air, texted me, wanted to know what the name of the phone again, and they went out and bought it that day.
That's awesome.
Isn't that
That's
something?
awesome.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, these are the latest, greatest phones, and the only phones in the U.S., the first phones in the U.S., that can tap into that low, mid, and high that I
Give us the
explained to
name
you.
of
And I
that
wanna
phone
tell you,
again. Give us the name of that phone again.
It's the Samsung Galaxy S20 5G smartphones. There's 3 phones in that line. Head into a T-Mobile store. You can look at all of them. There are great deals to be had. Anyone, not just new customers, can get half off the latest Samsung 5G smartphones via bill credits with an eligible trade. snag a BOGO offer with bill credits when adding a new line, tell them to go into a T-Mobile store right now and check out the next-gen 5G smartphones and let me know how they do.
Okay. Well, Andrea Smith, I need your help if you had another minute, and it will endear you to our listeners. Do you? Or is she gone? They cut her out.
No, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I'm here, but I have to run.
Oh, I thought it's okay. Next time we'll have you on. I'll ask my other question. Thank you very much. You're terrific. Andrea Smith, everyone. Thank you so much. Okay, we need to get ready for our next guest. Dr. Victor Sternberg will be joining us in a few minutes. Now, Anthony one day is going to kill me with his "You Are a Dinosaur." Jake, could you come back? I really need help on this. First of all, Anthony, as he does, insulted me, but rightly so, called me a dinosaur for my beliefs about pitching. The managers have been calling the pitchers for over 20 years. I've been asleep.
Most of them.
Well, but I don't get it. I mean, I get it, but they're not in the game. They can't see the stuff. They can't tell how good the ball's breaking, or can they, from the dugout?
Well, not every pitcher has. I'm sure Verlander throws exactly what he wants. They just use signs to get on. The catcher has to know what pitch is coming, obviously.
Right.
So some pitchers don't.
Like a knuckleball, there's no sense calling
Yeah,
those
of course
pitches.
not. Yeah.
That explains now why managers don't like knuckleballers. They don't have control.
And catchers especially hate them. They're impossible.
Now, I need to go back to this. If I read, and I know I asked you this a couple of weeks ago, but if I read one more story that Sanchez doesn't have a brain in his head, why do they have to keep bringing people to teach this guy to catch? What is it that he doesn't do?
Maybe he's not a hard worker. He doesn't pay attention to his defense.
Well, you have to.
Maybe he's just taking the designated hitter for granted. Maybe that's what he wants to do. Maybe he just doesn't like to catch. A lot of people don't.
Wow. But it got them to the big league, so they have to go with it. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I know you've been over there doing research. Anything else come to you want to mention? Because we had to get you off there quickly for that guest. But
I just can't believe ESPN is thinking about trading for Al Michaels.
Actually, yeah, Al Michaels, so that they can put him together with
Peyton Manning.
With Manning.
I don't think I would like Peyton Manning as a announcer.
Why not?
Something about his voice bothers me. But that's ESPN. The new TV contract is with the NFL's up pretty soon, and ESPN wants a Super Bowl. That's why they went after Romo, and I guess this is their big plan to get a Super Bowl.
Well, getting Al Michaels is a get, but again, he's long of tooth. He's like 75 years old, but
they would have to trade something like
well, they're prepared to. As
ABC and NBC traded John Madden for the rights to Oswald the Lucky Rabbit.
Excuse me?
That was a couple, I think
for
10,
real?
10 years ago, yeah.
So you mean I could get traded for Mickey Mouse?
That's exactly.
Like that?
Oswald was the precursor to the
Anthony's
creation of
chipping to
Mickey
get at his
Mouse.
phone, saying I'm the same height as Mickey Mouse. You know that, right?
Call in.
I know that he will too. I hate him.
But Michaels has 2 years left on his contract, which it'll be interesting because NBC loves Mike Tirico. They're kind of grooming him to take the Al Michaels role.
That's what they said.
So maybe ESPN could trade for him. I don't
Do
know
they
what
make
the
that
heck.
much money in a Super Bowl, the networks?
Oh my God!
That they want it.
Those commercials.
Oh God, they get a lot of money for those commercials. It shows what the heck I know. All right, 8:33. We need to reset. Jake Schaefer. We have this man do everything. All righty. Where are we? Weather. Let's take a quick look at the weather as we pass through now. 8:33. You're listening to Radio Westchester, and here's what's going on. It is 39 right now, getting up to 46 today. A mixture of sun and clouds. Tonight, mostly cloudy. Our temperature will be 31 degrees tonight, so it'll be a bit nippy. Saturday, lots of sunshine and breezy. The temperature 43. Sunday, lots of sunshine and breezy. The temperature getting up to 56. But Monday, and it's too bad it wasn't Sunday or Saturday, mostly sunny skies. The high will be 64. The weather is brought to you exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's best rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit UHGC.com. And the bottom of the hour will be supported by Aging Issues Management, the law firm of Payne & Con, and Plug-in Virtual Reality. And, of course, Jake was brought to you by Dominic's Fine Cigars, licensed retailer with a big selection, including Arturo Fuente Patrons and more. Dominic's Fine Cigars, located on Boston Post Road in Larchmont. They are open 7 days. Now, we're going to be talking with, especially with the coronavirus being what it is, it should be a very interesting visit with Dr. Victor Sternberg. And also beyond that, at 9 o'clock, a man you usually hear from on Wednesdays, but as you know, given the election and some schedule changes, we ran a repeat Wednesday, so he was not with us. But Harlan Ullman will join us at 9 o'clock. We'll be talking a number of things, the effect of coronavirus around the world. We'll be talking about Super Tuesday, but we'll also be talking about there are problems in NATO. There are things going on in NATO, and it's on the back pages these days, but it shouldn't be, because it does affect peace for sure. It affects the security of all of Europe and peace in Europe. So we do expect to hear from the doctor momentarily. Now, I want to, what do I have? I have all kinds of stuff. For those of you who wanted an update on the virus, here in Rochelle, the rabbi who is over at Young Israel has now been diagnosed with the illness, and so too has his son. Now, there are ripples there because the rabbi also teaches at Yeshiva University, and his son goes there. So how much and whether or not they will be closed is an issue. So we'll be checking our news as we go forward to catch up with that. Also, 2 employees at Iona College are under self-quarantine due to potential exposure to the virus. And that's all we know right now. We don't have more specific information. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to get a hold of Dr. Sternberg. So you stay right there. Good morning again, one and all. Had to take care of a little bit of housekeeping there. You always get a chance to see it. One of our ideas is that this station belongs to you, belongs to the community, so you may as well be a part of what we do here as well. My next guest, no stranger to you, his years as a host here in Westchester on various radio stations. His show, very successful show called Politics in Your Health, starring Dr. Victor Sternberg, which I was privileged to co-anchor with him. He is with us each and every Friday for at least 30 minutes, and today he's with us again. He was ill last week. Hopefully it wasn't the coronavirus. Please welcome, without further ado, Dr. Victor Sternberg. Good morning, Doc.
Good morning, Bob.
How are you
doing?
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling better. I still have a little residual cough. And my wife got the same thing. Unfortunately, we got this illness that was before the coronavirus took off. And ironically, I have to walk around when I'm coughing on my wife. We have to kind of hide.
Oh.
Because everybody is paranoid. I mean, we live in a very strange times right now.
Doctor, we do, and I'm glad to hear you say it. You and I and others can be often critical of things that the president does. And short of stuff that's disinformation, the president's not wrong in telling people to calm down. Or do we overreact? I mean, can you be vigilant without overreacting? How do we manage that?
Well, this is the tricky business is getting a handle on how lethal this virus is or is not.
Mm-hmm.
The statistics are somewhat distorted on fatalities because there's been a great concern that the illness has been underreported. So you look at statistics from South Korea,
Mm-hmm.
the statistics of death is very low. And you look at Marrone, and it's very high. And there is significant evidence that a lot of people get an illness that mimics this virus, and they don't get tested, and they get better. So until we have a handle on the true lethality of this disease, there is an underlying fear that, millions of people are going to die. And interesting enough, in China, where the virus has infected, just under 100,000 people, there's reported 3,000 deaths. But remember, that's a country of almost 3 or 4 billion people.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions is, why are so few Chinese people infected? You're talking about a tiny percent of the whole country getting infected. And the fact the virus was not even dealt with in the first couple of weeks. So part of me feels that this is a legitimate issue, but I believe it's being overhyped because of the unknown and because of the fact that we live in a hyper-aware society,
Mm-hmm.
so that everything gets magnified out of proportion. I hope that I'm wrong. I hope I'm right, and we will pass through this period without too much disruptions. I fear that the greatest disruption might be an economic one.
Well, yeah, I think we're seeing that already. The stock market, the futures were catastrophic this morning. Well, that's too strong a word, but they were down. And I must tell you, we see less numbers of people here at the train station.
Yeah, and interesting enough, the job figures, knocked the socks off today. They were expecting 160,000. They got 273,000 new jobs.
Mm-hmm.
That was pre-coronavirus. So the American economy has been booking, but I can just tell you from my patients who are canceling trips, my son works for a big company in White Plains, and they are starting Monday, only half the workforce can show up. The others have to work from home for 2 weeks, and they're going to vice versa. It's talking about a lot of people. So we are, and in one sense, being proactive. In the other sense, maybe we are hyper-reacting. I am concerned a little bit about whether our society tends to underreact to important things and overreact to those things that are not as critical. One of the things that disturbs me, Bob, is a report that we don't have enough testing kits.
Oh, they just put $8 billion seems like a lot of money to deal with this. It makes me wonder what the hell we've been doing.
Yeah, well, the question is, when this first broke out in China,
yes,
and there was concern, we had a lead time of maybe 6 weeks before we got to this place. You would think we'd ramp up big time. We'd be ready for this, because I've already had people in my world who've been exposed to somebody who was tested positive. And they were told that they can't get tested at their doctor, that they have to wait till they have symptoms to get tested.
Mm-hmm.
Because of a lack of testing kits, we really don't have a handle on how many people have been exposed to this virus. And so it does disturb me, that the federal government, and I have to go to the top because that's where it all begins,
Mm-hmm.
wasn't quite prepared enough, because other countries have done much more testing than we have. And, America, the land of everything, should be the most reactive and proactive country in the world. And repeatedly, as we've seen, we've talked about numerous occasions where we've dropped the ball in this country. It seems to be that we are not proactive enough. And God willing, it won't be a fatal error. But, interesting about a small world that is, Bob, let me just give you how we all connect.
Please do, doctor.
So I get a call from a patient on Tuesday that his wife admitted the patient at Lawrence Hospital,
Mm-hmm.
who is now at Columbia. The man had been sick for several weeks, and he was admitted to Lawrence finally on Tuesday. He was admitted last Thursday, but she tells me that he was admitted and his wife is going to be tested. And he calls me back yesterday and told me that she tested positive, that she has symptoms now, and that she is getting better. As of yesterday, she was feeling better. She wasn't hospitalized. It was more minor. Ironically, from that one phone call, I went to teach yesterday, and one of the professors who lives in Long Island told me that his son goes to school with that lawyer from New Rochelle's son in New York City.
Yes.
And they've closed down that school.
Yep.
So there is this tremendous connectiveness that we can't escape the fact that we will all be exposed one way or other.
Oh, inevitable. It's inevitable. I mean, we, as you know, just a few blocks from this radio station where the aforementioned synagogue is now, the leader of the congregation, the rabbi, was diagnosed, and his son, and he teaches also at yeshiva. So the question is, are they going to close that university now or not?
Right. And how many people has he exposed? So, we don't. This is one of those stories. It's like a science fiction movie.
Yeah, it is.
And we're in the middle of the plot, and we don't know the ending.
Do you know what I can't help but feel, Doctor, and maybe this may not be the common approach. God only knows how many, perhaps not superbugs, but other bugs that we get, and they weave through the population, and they have some people die from it because of pre-existing conditions, and then we never knew about it, and we just go on. Isn't it also possible that at the end of the day, when this is over, a lot of people will have developed yet another resistance to yet another virus? People who are severely compromised for other reasons will die, as with other viruses, but that there won't be any great plague, if you will. Isn't that possible?
That's very likely to this virus.
Yeah.
The problem is, Bob, always is that, Mother Nature is constantly evolving.
Yes.
And that and because of the interconnectedness of the world, one time, if this was a Chinese virus, we wouldn't know about it. We wouldn't know what's going on in China. It would never get here.
Mm-hmm.
One of the lessons that I think people on the political right avoid examining is that the idea of a standalone America, that we don't need the rest of the world, that somehow we have our own system and we really can survive alone. We've shot holes in that, Bob, because this virus indicates that all of us in the world are really connected to a degree that we never imagined. And what happens in China or Italy affects us and can have catastrophic effects.
Absolutely. Although, is there not a silver lining in the fact, and this, I don't know, let me just say it. Where the actual evolution of the virus, though, will happen more quickly than it usually does. Now, on one hand, it may hurt people, but at the end of the day, it should wear itself out earlier, too, if we come up with the proper means to deal with it. In other words, it used to take years for this kind of a virus to weave its way through the planet. Now it's going to happen in months.
Yeah, well, that's true. And unfortunately, the side effects will be different because of the economic downturn and how that's going to affect us. It's interesting. Our defense budget is, I think, close to $800 billion.
Mm-hmm.
And that yet we had people who proposed cuts in the Center for Disease Control.
Yeah.
And don't we get, this is what drives people like myself a little crazy. I mean, the existential threat on the other countries and all of our nuclear fears and our armaments is like this game of one-mousemanship. We keep building higher and higher weapons, faster and faster weapons, defenses against them. And ironically, the world is now coming to a halt because of a little tiny bug we can't see. And mankind can't seem to transcend the idea that we are one race of humans living on this same planet, and that whether global warming is uncomfortable politically or economically, it affects every human being, not just people in China or Germany. It affects us all, as this virus does. And you would hope that it doesn't we immediately go back to this me versus you mentality. We cannot live in a world. The world is shrunken down so much, Bob, that I would hope that wiser minds will prevail. But you and I know so well, Bob, we've had this conversation, that self-interest seems to have more power than the good of all. And, if this virus, let's take, why so one report, I said the best case scenario was 12 million dead people and a $2 trillion hit to the economy. I don't know whether that's hype or not. Everything tends to be hyped.
12 million. Now, is that here in the U.S. or worldwide?
I think worldwide.
Okay.
But regardless, Bob, how many lessons do we have to learn? How many times do we have to be reminded that we're one race and that we're one planet? You tell me, Bob. I don't know the answer.
Doctor, that's considered my guest, Dr. Victor Sternberg, a longtime host of Politics in Your Health. Doctor, what you're saying for a lot of people who, not that they don't agree with you, who don't want to hear it, is that it's a kumbaya moment. We're all one, get over it. That's not the way the world is. That's what you will get, sir. But of course you're right, and of course that is the case. What's on the back burner, Doctor? What else is going on that gets obscured by these things? Because, people continue to smoke. They continue to do drugs and different things and eat sugar and things that are killing them. What's new in the world of medicine?
We've talked about that, Bob, and we've talked about the total lack of emphasis on prevention of disease. And we're coming down to, we've gotten down to 2 candidates now, after this kind of whirlwind.
Yes, thank goodness.
Circus that we have called primaries. We have yet to have the conversation, whether it be between the left wing of the party or the right wing of the party or the middle of the party, about, and this virus may be kind of an opportunity to have a conversation. How do we create a healthcare system that is affordable and reaches us all and prevents disease? How do we do that? What conversations do we need to have? And my concern, Bob, is that, it relates to the nature of people that ascend to positions of power. And you've heard some very wise people in the medical field and ethical field and philosophical field who have very good opinions about how we could proceed as a nation. But it seems that in order to get to the highest positions, so you can run for local office, state office, or in this case, the president, one has to become so politicized and take positions that will get one elected. And wisdom does not have, wisdom and insights don't seem to be the issues that get people into power. And so we have this repeated political class that the people that choose those roles are almost invariably not wise people, almost without exception.
And unfortunately, that's the case. 8:52. Doctor, I wanted to ask you about something, and it's a touchy subject, I know, for some listeners. And I don't want to make the mistake of casting aspersions on an entire profession that may or may not, I do not know, be very valuable. But I've got some people, they recommend guests to me. And there are a number of chiropractic type guests that people have introduced to come on my show that ostensibly can cure everything from the common cold through bunions, through either meditation or where does good chiropractic end and quackiness begin? Or is that such a touchy subject that you dare not go near it?
No, I think, Bob, I had this conversation. I was at the dental school on Wednesday, and someone presented some technology that was, very expensive and very fancy and was showing, some very impressive results. And I raised my hand and I said, this is interesting, but this is not evidence-based healthcare. So what you've shown me is that if you do this, this can happen, okay? But you didn't show me that the same thing can happen if you do A, B, or C, except A, B, and C are less expensive and don't require all the hype. So what you're looking at in the area of much of those peripheral sciences like chiropractic, and I'm not going to demean them because they do help people in pain, is that evidence-based comparison side by side. The doctor does the chiropractor does an adjustment, the physical therapist gives you some exercise that stretches you out, the yoga individual does some yoga positions, the physician gives you a pill of muscle relaxants, And lo and behold, they all worked,
Mm-hmm.
or none worked. The problem is that when you're promoting a profession or a self, you often take by necessity to survive a position that you're the only one that holds the key to the answer. And I can tell you unequivocally, I've been to chiropractors, and I've had severe pain in my back, and I've gotten relief primarily by going to see a physical therapist or a yoga person who does very severe stretching
Excuse me.
to
Yes.
relax my muscles. And so for me, now do I say they can cure all? Absolutely not. But the problem is that evidence-based medicine, what has been shown by scientific comparison side by side, works most effectively, does not exist in many of the professions we practice, whether it be education or whether it be chiropractic medicine or dentistry. They're all suffering from a lack of evidence-based science, so everybody has the answer. Come to me, and I can cure you.
You know, it's interesting, Doctor, and this is not to besmirch any of these things I'm about to mention, but whether it's religion, whether it's belief in crystals, whether it's belief in the afterlife, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I notice that there is a tendency among humans, all of us, to find hope in what we don't know. You know, it's like in my Catholic religion, an awful lot of people in my age group or older were upset that the Mass is now done in English because they appreciated the mystery, because perhaps out of the mystery there was a miracle. It gave more credence to the supernatural. People don't like evidence-based, Doctor. It doesn't answer their fervent hopes.
Yeah, look, we all live, one of the things that human beings live with is fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of death, fear of what's going to happen. And we're always clinging to finding answers to make the fear go away. And there's so many different places you can seek that answer. But remember, it is a yearning of the individual to find an answer to life's mysteries that attracts people to find something, to give them something to rest their soul on.
I do understand that. Now, there is one link, if I may. And it is the one concession I make to people who might otherwise be called quacks. So real is the placebo effect that it's a factor in empirical testing. What do we know about it? What do we really know?
There's a good book I'm going to discuss one of these weeks.
Yes.
It is called You Are the Placebo. And basically, there's an enormous amount of information that belief can trigger different metabolic outcomes.
Yeah.
That as you believe a certain way, you release enzymes and hormones that have effect on blood vessels, on cells, on inflammation. So it is absolutely true that what you believe strongly can have an effect upon what your body does. This is not a fairy tale. The human body does respond to the emotional state of the individual.
Yeah, hence the value of meditation and things of that nature. Although I remind people
or even prayer.
Yeah,
I mean,
prayer but prayer though is this is me now, Doctor, not you. The thing about prayer is it has that effect because of the firm belief. But the fact that somebody upstairs is picking up the phone is absurd to me.
Right. As you pray, you release different sets of hormones as you deep than you would if you scream and yell out of fear. No doubt. Look, the understanding of the human body. I have a stiff neck, and I couldn't move my head yesterday. And my last patient of the morning was a Japanese woman who does very deep massage. And I said, "Would you please?" I had to come in. I'll stay a little later. And she put me on a table, and she worked on my neck. But interesting enough, she put her fingers, she was wearing gloves, deep into my mouth and was applying pressure to the floor of my mouth. And it was very uncomfortable. And she said, "This will help relieve your pain in your neck." And as she was pushing there, and I was really complaining, it was extremely uncomfortable, almost borderline on torture. When she stopped, believe it or not, some of the pain was less. And I was trying to say, what in the world is connecting the floor of my mouth and my neck?
Who knows?
And there was obviously some neurological or physiological connection between what she did and what was released on a biochemical level that affected the spasm of my neck. I have no clue what it was. but it's part of the great mystery. We don't know what we don't know in many
Isn't
areas.
that the
of
truth?
medicine.
My grandmother used to do this thing if I had a severe headache called passing it. She'd pray over my head, and you'd be damned if it didn't feel better after she did it. So, and I say that as an honest concession. I understand that there's more than we know, but I worry about people putting too much stock in quackery.
Well, Bob, you know what? As long as there are people who are anxious to find answers, there'll be people that will abuse them. That's, as P.T. Barnum said, there's a sucker born every minute.
Boy, he wasn't kidding, was he? Doctor, thank you very much. We move on to Harlan Ullman. Please travel safely. Dr. Victor Sternberg, everybody, thank you so very much. All righty, we need to take a quick break. That is my next guest. You got to love it. You got to love it how people can get right on the money. We move straight now to our 9 o'clock hour, and I remind you that the 9 o'clock hour in our long-form interview is supported by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, a top-rated campus of senior care. Visit uhgc.com. Aging Issues Management, Dominic's Fine Cigars, the law firm of Payne & Con, and Plug-in Virtual Reality. Now, up next, a man that you listen to every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, but this week we had to make some changes because of Super Tuesday. But he's with us today, and we have a lot to talk about, not the least of which is the effect of the coronavirus on politics and the economy around the world, of course, Super Tuesday results, and lastly, but perhaps not of least importance in terms of world security, what's going on with NATO. Please welcome, without further ado, he is I should really tell you who he is. He's an author. He's a columnist. He's a national security expert of world renown. He advises governments, businesses, foreign secretaries, foreign ministers, the military. He has himself been a destroyer commander and a swift boat commander. He teaches at military and war colleges. Please welcome Harlan Ullman. Good morning, sir. Harlan? Did I not plug him in correctly? All right, I guess I did not. This happens. I got to go make sure I got him. Alrighty, folks, we made our connection with Harlan Ullman. We've already introduced him to you. And one of the things I did neglect to say, remember his latest book. It resonates so much. Anatomy of Failure, How America Loses the Wars It Starts. Please welcome Harlan Ullman. Good morning, Harlan.
Good morning, Robert.
So much going on in the world. Now, I told you I had a surprise for you, and one is a piece that was in Business Week, and we'll get to that third, but it has to do with what's going on with NATO and the Trump administration and where we're headed there. But I guess we can start out with people are worried about the coronavirus, not just in terms of the medical impact, but now it could have economic and certainly is around the world. And how much does that affect national security? And how much should we be worried from an economic and even a security standpoint?
Well, that is the key question, Bob. in a worst-case scenario, if this virus is to spread, it affects both supply and demand. If you can't get supplies, for example, in a company that I chair, we are dependent upon foreign sources to fabricate our solutions. And if they dry up, we're in bad shape, and so are our customers. Similarly, with demand, if people are not out and about and buying things, demand dries up as well. And so you have a double whammy with demand and supply drying up, and the consequences could lead to a global recession or worse. That's the worst case. The question is how quickly, however, does this virus spread? Does it run its course? If you contract it once, can you contract it a second time? Nobody knows these issues, so we're in the very early days. And one hopes that by the end of March there'll be better analysis of understanding the scope and reach of this particular disease and the ultimate, or if not the ultimate, the likelihoods of its further spread. But until then, we're in huge uncertainty, and that's why you see the Dow Jones and other stock indices moving 1,000 points a day in both directions. It's the uncertainty that generates fear, and fear generates uncertainty. And unlike other situations, people are genuinely afraid because the virus is invisible. You have no idea where it's coming from. You go back and look at all the horror movies that have been made about these pandemics and so forth. And so people are very, very worried, and that, of course, worry generates the uncertainty, which then redounds in the economic markets. So to me, the issue in terms of security is health-wise and economically and financially. It's what this does to the global economy, which on the one hand could be very frightening. On the other hand, the fact that the stock markets have occasionally rebounded positively suggests that there's less fragility in the markets than may appear. But this is fragile still because we don't know how far this disease is going to run.
Well, certainly doctor, I just had a doctor on, forgive me, Harlan, although you are that too. Our studio is right in the eye of the storm here in New Rochelle, New York. We've got 18 cases right here, just a couple of blocks away from the radio station. So, but it's interesting, you can follow the trail here from the individual, and no one knows how that individual got it, right through his temple. And right now, we learned this morning that the rabbi there, he himself now has contracted it, as has his son, and his son goes to yeshiva, and he's a professor at yeshiva, so it continues to expand. I did want to, I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. I did want to move into the larger issue. How do you feel about what came out of the Super Tuesday events and Biden and perhaps whomever may run as vice president? I do think he's going to prevail myself over Bernie. What do you think?
I think that Joe Biden is in for a hugely rough ride. The fact that he did well on Super Tuesday marks really the beginning of the primary, not the end. What Elizabeth Warren is going to do remains uncertain, and she could throw voters one way or the other. Bernie Sanders, who I detest in terms of his policy and indeed his character, could turn his voters off. And even though if Biden were to emerge as the candidate, a number of Sanders voters may choose not to vote for anyone. And so unlike the Ross Perot entry in the 1992 election, in which he took 20% of the vote, or nearly, and defeated George H.W. Bush, or allowed Bill Clinton to win the election, in this case, Sanders is the spoiler, and I can envisage a scenario where Sanders just says, I'm not going to back anybody, his voters don't show up, and Trump is reelected. So I also don't see that this Super Tuesday was this great, remarkable comeback. I think it was inevitable. Joe Biden is well known. He was a vice president. Most people think favorably of him. So I think the hype about this huge comeback has been overstated. But to repeat my point, this is far from over. This is really the beginning of the end, possibly, and we'll see what emerges. But Elizabeth Warren is a spoiler. Bernie Sanders is a spoiler. And will the Democrats be able to unite? I have my doubts, and if they can't unite, then you know who's going to win the presidency.
Wow. I was just stumped by that frightening thought. But anyway, I need to move on to something Elizabeth Warren said today, which is her concern about Bernie is the my way or the highway. She seemed to be expressing a conciliatory tone that Democrats need to unite, but will she feel that way if it's uniting under Joe Biden? as opposed
Well, that's
to...
a key question. I suspect that a lot of Democrats are really putting a great deal of pressure. You know, I'm sure John Kerry from Massachusetts is saying to Elizabeth, look, you came in third in your state. You know, this tells you something. We've got to unite behind Biden, and we've got to defeat Trump. But whether she has the character, backbone, and understanding to realize that, or whether she's going to be an angry woman, and I don't say that in a sexist sense, but she strikes me as somebody who could become very irascible, we'll see. But these are all the unknowns, and how they play out obviously will determine who is going to be the candidate, but more importantly, the base that will support that candidate, and will that base be significantly large to defeat Trump? Trump has got 42, 43, 40% of the population. And have you noted the other day when Elliott Management was trying to take over Twitter, Elliott Management only has 4% of the company. Trump has 43% say of the electoral vote. That may be more than enough to sustain him as it did in 2016. We will see. But all these unpredictabilities are going to be exacerbated by what's happening with the virus. We'll come to the virus in a moment. But at this stage, I don't think anything is certain. And while it appears that Joe Biden is the more likely candidate, there are lots of things that are going to erupt. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin wants to subpoena the Bidens over this Burisma stuff. And I fear Burisma is going to be the equivalent of what brought John Kerry down in 2008 over Swift boating. Unfortunately, Joe Biden is going to be Burisma voted, and I hope he can retaliate, asking what Trump is doing with his family and how his family has been benefiting. But at this stage, I think Trump has a powerful weapon to attack Biden, and unfortunately, Biden is trapped by his emotions and the very, very, very difficult position he is in family-wise, with his son Beau having died and Hunter, having had all these problems with drugs, money, marital issues, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, unfortunately, we'll stay tuned, but this is not going to be a very, very simple road to ride.
No, not at all. And you know what I'm more concerned about, Joe Biden? My gut is either you did something or you didn't. Now, they'll make hay. Of course, Kerry was a hero that they made look like not one, but I think that they may have worn out a little bit this Burisma thing, but they will throw stones. I think the larger problem is, and boy, I hate saying this, and I'm going to start out by something that was actually humorous. Now, I like Joe Biden, and I want him to be the next president. And I needed to say that because someone sent me a text that was so funny that I was laughing for 10 minutes, and it was not very complimentary to Joe Biden. And it said, and I quote, it was a picture of Joe Biden, and it said, "Hi, I'm Joe Biden, and I forgot this message." And it was funny. Yeah, it is. But he's developing this image that the Republicans are touting, that he's slipping. Now, is he slipping, or is he just, a little overwhelmed by all this? I mean, no one wants to put somebody in the White House they think is slipping.
Well, he's going to be 78 years old.
Yeah.
And so the question is, who knows? Joe has always had problems articulating when he first entered the Senate, so whether that's getting worse or not. But the fact of the matter is that whether he's slipping or not, he is the most viable candidate to defeat Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And as an independent, and I hope as somebody who does put America first, that is the issue. So even Joe Biden, who's a step or two slower, to me is far better than Donald Trump, who can't even speak truthfully about the current virus. And that, to me, is the reasons why he should be defeated, and in fact why he should have been impeached and convicted. That may not be a high crime and a misdemeanor, but if he can't get his facts straight in terms of a virus that is potentially ruinous to the country, he's not somebody we want in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
We're going to go on to that in a minute. Now, a story broke out of the Associated Press this morning at 6:18. I don't know if you saw it, but a judge sharply rebuked Barr's handling of the Mueller report. Federal judge.
Oh, I read that. Yes, absolutely.
Now they're going to criticize the judges, and this comes on the heel of Charlie Schumer just making a fool of himself.
Of course.
But now this comes on the heels of that. But we've got to start respecting judges' opinions. I'm sure that Mueller and the president are going to castigate this judge for being some kind of a left-wing nut. But why don't we need to start respecting judges and their rulings a lot more than we are?
the problem, Bob, is that the politicization, partisanship, and the divides have become so huge that everybody is in the firing line. And even though I understand why John Roberts, the Chief Justice, responded to Schumer, he didn't respond to Democrats, to Republicans when they were equal, I think, impositions. Especially Barr's letter before the Mueller report. So I can understand why Roberts did what he did, but still there seems to be a partisan bite here because he didn't do it against Republicans, and I think that's the issue.
Or for that matter, I guess it was only a week ago where the president was suggesting that Justices Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg ought to recuse themselves when the Southern District comes before the courts with his tax issues. So he needs to be more even-handed, and one hopes he can be. But you mentioned the virus in this other context, and we need to go there. I just had a very learned doctor on, and one of his concerns is, we spend $80 billion on the defense budget. We don't have enough packages. We don't have enough testing kits. How, when we talk about national security and public safety, do we have a National Institute of Health that's behind the times?
Well, I think that's a mixed metaphor, Bob.
Well, I'm asking.
The problem is, I am, and I'm going to answer your question directly. The problem is you don't know what the next pandemic is going to be, and so if you have test kits, are you going to test for smallpox? Are you going to test for botulism? Are you going to test for whatever? And so new strains develop, and so I don't think that that's a fair comment. Okay. However, here is the crisis point. I do not know Health and Human Services Secretary Azar, but he strikes me as somebody who's very, very competent and able. Dr. Fauci from the NIH is extremely good. So I think at the very top you've got some very competent people. I am concerned that this administration, in essence, has cut the linkages between the federal government, the connective tissue, and state and local governments. It's like a marionette or a puppeteer trying to deal with a puppet, and the strings have been cut. So I don't see how there's the linkage right now between the federal government and this board that's supervising or looking over the coronavirus issue and how it's reaching down to support communities. I think that's the biggest weakness we face. And in that regard, the defense budget is irrelevant, but the cuts that the Trump administration has made to NIH and CDC and everything else could prove to be fatal. I think that's the problem. Now, we have discussed pandemics, go back to the Black Plague in the 14th century or the 1918-1920 flu virus or H1N1. Pandemics are nothing new, but rather like we were never able to respond in advance to Hurricane Katrina, it took that catastrophe to make us a little bit smarter and better. I hope that we will learn in this case that we need to have the connective tissue between the federal government and the other levels of government to deal with pandemics, many of which will be unpredictable and new forms of disease that right now we don't know and will not be able to know until they strike. That, to me, is really the issue. And it could well be that if the Trump administration handles this as the W administration handled Katrina, this now becomes a Katrina virus and could be absolutely devastating to Donald Trump and his team if by, say, November, 30% of Americans are infected by this sort of thing. But the other issue that looms in addition to pandemics, has anybody thought about climate change? You had these hurricanes, and you had these hurricanes or these tornadoes in Nashville that killed 20 or 30 people. 2 weeks ago, 20% of the part of the Antarctic ice cap melted. We're so focused on pandemics, global warming, climate change could be even a greater threat, and yet we have a president who's denying that climate change is really in place. So this goes beyond pandemics. Obviously, we've got to deal with pandemics, and climate change is a longer-term issue. But if we remain as ignorant and closed-minded to climate change as we have been to pandemics, these are not going to be good times.
On both sides, Harlan, one of the things that concerns me, and I know it's nothing new, but it seems to be greater than ever, everything is politicized now. There was a time when something happened, a national emergency, okay, if you got a benefit from it, you talked it up. But now, from climate change to this particular, and both sides, to this particular crisis in health, everything has to have a political spin. I mean, apropos of your comment about the connection between the government and the agencies under the government, it's quite clear that the president would want to manipulate everything that comes out of the words, and probably a Democratic president too, everything that comes out of the mouth of of his commissioners. And This is just a terrible thing for the country. This is, that's what China does. It shouldn't be what America does.
Well, we've been in this place before, Bob. The Civil War, obviously, we had this huge partisanship. When Franklin Roosevelt was president, 40% of America hated Roosevelt no matter what he did. Mm-hmm. Then we had the whole Vietnam episode and the race riots and the issues of the late 60s, early 70s. We've been here before, but I agree with you. The system has never been this politicized. We were divided over specific issues, and now, as to use a medical metaphor, as the coronavirus seems to infect any place where it goes, partisanship and polarization have spread like a disease and have affected and infected virtually all of American society, and that is a big difference.
Now, it's time for me to go to a place that's going to get me in trouble with listeners. As we pass through 920, Harlan Ullman, our guest, internationally renowned national security expert, and in a little later in the interview, we're going to talk about NATO on one of his real specialties. But here's the issue, and it bothers me. And I think coronavirus, of course, global warming, think politics. One of the biggest issues we seem to have in this country is ignorance. I'm sitting behind this microphone realizing that I'm forced to read this stuff. I mean, I have a genuine interest in it too, but to read this stuff and be on top of it every day. But you can fan the flames of fear because people don't understand even what a virus is. I had someone on my staff talk me out of going out to the train platform and asking people whether or not they understood what a Republican form of government was, because the answer was going to be so downtrodden no that they wouldn't care. How much is ignorance a problem in this great country of ours?
I'm not sure it's necessarily ignorance. Some of these issues people just don't understand because they're brand new. And so in this particular case, very few people are well enough informed, including the medical profession, on the coronavirus, simply because we don't know. Now, I agree with you in principle that if you ask a majority of Americans about the Supreme Court or pick any sort of civics issue, the answer is that people do not know very much about that, and that gets back to issues of education. But in this particular case, the pandemic, because even experts don't know, I think it follows that people who are not in the field are not going to be better informed. So I just don't think in this case it's an issue of ignorance.
But it's not going to be the Black Plague either.
How do you know?
All right, fair enough. All right, then let's go.
It's not going to kill 50%, but the likelihood if this thing spreads, it's not out of the question. If you take a look at contact ratios and so forth, 20% of Americans, 30% of Americans could contract the disease. If the figures are right and 80% have virtually no particular symptoms, that's fine. If 2 or 3% die, that's going to be in the hundreds of thousands of people. But think of the secondary effects that has, as I noted earlier, on supply and demand. People are not going to go to work. They're going to stay home. And if we decide to close all the schools, does that make life any difficult? Because what are you going to do with children? You're going to leave them home unguarded or unsupervised? They're still going to be out. So I'm not sure that these major shutdowns are going to achieve much. But we're in the field of the unknown, and we haven't really practiced for this before. And so we are, in essence, the blind man who's stumbling their way through this particular maze.
This is why you're here. Okay, then let's get to the other issue, because politics is our specialty here. Talked out of it by my own staff of going on the platform. If people don't understand our Republican form of government and checks and balances, how can they hold Trump honestly accountable when his greatest attacks are on that?
Well, they can't, and they won't. And the only way you're going to do that is to elect a different president. And as we discussed before, with 43%, whatever that number is, in the low 40s, even maybe the higher 40s, Trump has a lock. And unless the Democrats can mount a sufficient political momentum to bring out voters, Trump will be reelected.
Why is he a lock?
Simply because of the electoral college system. It's not a popular vote, and you can make a case as to how Trump can win again without having a majority of the popular vote. The nature of the system. His team is clever. He's smart. He focused on those particular issues. And as I said, a powerful 43% united base, and his base is united. I mean, Trump's popularity, or at least opinions, 95% or so of Republicans support Trump. That's higher than Dwight Eisenhower.
And you know what needs to be said, and it's not whether or not you agree with the issues, but he does act on the issues that he ran on, except for health care. No one acts on that, except Obama did.
And,
But
everything he does, he plays to his base. And that base is sufficient to keep him in office.
Well,
unless the Democrats can mobilize the other 57%. That, to me, is the big task, and that's the challenge they face. And that's the weakness that Trump is going to exploit. Talking about Sleepy Joe and, Joe Who, and, I don't remember approving this message, so forth and so on. What he wants to do, what Trump wants to do clearly, is to divide the Democratic base so that if Biden is indeed the nominee, or whomever the nominee is, that Trump's 43% will trump whatever the Democrats can turn out.
Well, all's fair in politics and more. Harlan Ullman, our guest. Harlan, I wanted to move on to an issue. One of my sources, I was going through Bloomberg Business Week, and there was a piece there about Trump gets pushy with NATO. The alliance is being hectored by the leader of the superpower that founded it. Now, again, rightly so, people ought to pick up more of perhaps their financial responsibilities. But there are other things going on in NATO, how we deal with China, how we deal with Russia, how we deal with the different countries such as Turkey that are in this particular alliance, but that do bad things. Where are we headed with NATO?
Well, I think where we're headed to NATO is that NATO is going to become increasingly moribund and more of a debating society. Britain's exit because of Brexit, to me, is a really important negative indication, because leaving the European Union will lessen Britain's influence on the continent and indeed with Europe. And with the accession of North Macedonia, you now have 30 countries that are engaged. NATO operates on consensus, which means unanimity, and only one vote will prevent NATO from doing what needs to be done. The fundamental issue, in my judgment, has always been that NATO was a military alliance dedicated against a military threat, the Soviet Union, and its principle, indeed its sole reason or raison d'etre, was to prevent war in Europe, which it did very successfully. But now what is needed is a political alliance, which is far more difficult to generate because it is no longer a function of only military forces. And NATO has had great difficulty in trying to transform itself from basically a military alliance to a geostrategic or political one. And without really strong American leadership, that becomes a mission impossible. Now, the best case people can make is that Trump was trying to get NATO to spend more. NATO, over the next 10 years, is going to spend $400 billion on defense, and so therefore Trump is going to be satisfied with NATO. There are two issues on that. I'm not sure that that's correct. And second, I don't think that NATO had to spend more money, quite frankly. The question is not how much you spend, but how wisely you spend it. And simply because each country is going to develop more ships or more airplanes or more tanks or whatever their particular procurement programs are, that doesn't mean the alliance is any stronger, because it's not the alliance capability that necessarily has been increased, it's the individual members. And so I've called for a revision of strategy to do all sorts of things that don't require more money, that would form a better deterrent, that also deal with active measures. Those are the non-kinetic, non-forceful tools that the Russians are using to divide NATO with through the internet, through disinformation, misinformation, through intimidation, through use of energy as a lever. That's where NATO is weakest, and that's where I think American leadership is essential. And so will NATO be around in the next 10 years? Probably. Will NATO be as relevant as it should be? I simply don't think so, because it has to make this transition more to a political alliance. And simply as the European Union has never been able to make its transition to a political alliance, it's really been a monetary one. Those are calling all the divisive issues. Now, the good news, in my mind, is that I think that the greatest threat from China or Russia is implosion. I could easily see another Gorbachev-like revolution in Russia once Putin is replaced. Now, whether that's good or bad remains to be seen. And similarly in China, the notion that we're going to become engaged in a war with China, to me, is a dangerous myth. I think the really biggest problem with China is that if you have all these issues of a shadow banking system, a real estate market that's overblown, the need to have 7 or 8 or 10% real growth a year just to sustain the 500 million or so Chinese that live under the poverty line, all these kinds of issues make the internal politics of China exceedingly difficult. And as you will look from history, once a generation or so, there's always been some kind of a peasant's revolution, some kind of a revolution. And so rather than engage China and Russia as enemies, we should gauge them as states that do not have similar interests to ours, but states we need to work with, where we have common interests, and where we don't, we take up smart steps to make sure that our interests are protected. For example, this tariff war with China is economically insane and does no good for anyone. The smartest thing the administration could do right now is to withhold the tariffs during this pandemic crisis. Moving away from all sorts of arms control agreements with the Russians simply makes no sense, because it opens up the possibility for an arms race. And quite frankly, the trouble with an arms race is that we cannot afford it, despite the $740 billion a year we spend on defense, when we're looking at replacement nuclear forces, the B-21 bomber, the Columbia-class submarine, a new land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's going to raise the cost of our strategic forces to close to 10% of the budget, when historically it's been below 5%. Well, where's that money going to come from? It's going to come from the conventional forces, which we need more. And so from a purely self-interest perspective, we need arms control so that we can afford the military we need, because if we don't have it, we're going to be forced to build nuclear forces that are going to be hugely expensive and that are going to come at the expense of other systems. So I'm afraid that this whole notion of regarding China and Russia as adversaries and enemies is misplaced, and it exaggerates the dangers. And whereas we're not focusing, for example, in NATO on active measures and the political consequences of Russia, it weakens us. So that's a very, very long answer to a very good question.
Okay, let's move to something that you've been an advisor to the Atlantic Council. We've heard often about this, the prospect of a true Atlantic alliance between the United States and Great Britain, such as she was, I guess. What about those two entities, or two concepts?
Well, we've always had a special relationship with Britain since actually it goes back to World War I, and Admiral Sims, who headed the American Navy in Europe. But there's always been a special relationship. It obviously reached a peak in World War II and then in the Cold War. The issue right now is that Britain is no longer playing with the same deck that it once did. And even from a military perspective, and our intelligence sharing is virtually absolute, but England or Britain really lacks the military capacity it once had. And so I fear that this special relationship is going to lessen, especially with Brexit, because Britain now has less clout in the European Union. Then you have the issues of Germany, which does not have a leader, France, and the fact that some European countries are indeed focused on Russia for economic and energy issues and do not share the same view that we do. You have Turkey, which has always been an outlier because it can't get into the European Union. And now you see Putin and Erdogan, the Turkish president, signing an agreement in Syria. What's really interesting, and you get back to NATO, Bob, Article 5 of NATO says an attack against one is an attack against all.
Yes.
Well, the Turks were attacked by the Syrians. Supposing Turkey said, Article 5, NATO's going to go to war in Syria, how many of NATO's 29 countries are going to vote yes on that? The answer is not many, so NATO won't, and what does that do to the alliance? So NATO is not going to be requested by Turkey for Article 5, but it just shows that there are some fragilities within the alliance. We need a really strong Atlantic alliance to deal with China, because what China is trying to do is to develop its own economic and political sphere in Asia, where it's autarkic in that within this sphere with Belt and Road, it is not dependent upon the West or anybody else. It's going to have its own internet through 5G and Huawei, and someday I think it hopes that the renminbi, its currency, will become the reserve currency or a co-current reserve currency of the world. That's not evil from their perspective. It's rational. It's not in our best interest. So what's the best way to deal with that? And the best way to deal with that is to have an economic, political, and military bloc that's larger than China. That's the Atlantic Alliance. And I'm not suggesting the alliance is directed against China. What I'm saying is that the Atlantic Alliance enables us to be able to have the freedom to be able to operate the way we want at a time when China is pursuing its own interests, but we don't seem to recognize that reality.
Apropos of this, just a little note, look back to history on something that I read recently, and I kept thinking about of course, the different alliances, NATO, particularly when President Obama did not enforce his own red line. I was reading a piece about World War II, about how it might have been very, very different had England not guaranteed Poland based on the strife that was going on there between Russia and the Germans. Had they not made that pact to support and to go to war over Poland, that the world might be a very different place today, or at least the outcome of World War II might have been very different.
Well, I don't think that you can, supposing we'd been invaded by Martians.
Oh, yeah, I think that's happened.
I don't think that. Look, the fact is that Hitler had pushed to the limits, Czechoslovakia,
yes,
all the places where he had Sudetenland, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If it weren't Poland, it was going to be somebody
else. Okay, that was my take.
So I don't think that was the issue. Europe had no, Western Europe had no alternative. What's interesting is they didn't have to battle. They didn't have to lose the battle for France,
right?
Simply because in every category, the Allies. France and Britain had far better, more capable forces than the Germans.
Yeah, that's what I read, and I'm trying to figure out how that happened.
I'll tell you how it happened. Guess how many prime ministers France had between 1919 and 1939?
How many?
33.
Oh, and the Brits had Chamberlain, but
well, it wasn't so much Chamberlain. I mean, but Chamberlain was because World War I destroyed the cream of British, not only British but European manhood. Nobody wanted to go to war. But the fact is that, unfortunately, the way the forces were deployed, et cetera, in France on the Allied side, they could easily, I shouldn't say easily, they could have stopped the assault. And if the assault had been stopped, that might not have been the end of Hitler, but it certainly would have been certainly a block. But
very interesting.
These things happen, and you can rewrite history any way you want.
No, I know, but what I found very compelling, naturally Chamberlain's taken a lot of heat in history for waving the document "Peace in Our Time," but then when he saw that the Russians went back on it, he doesn't get credit for having stiffened. I mean, the Germans, he doesn't get credit for having stiffened his spine when it came to saying, "Oh no," because he had many entreaties to not.
Well, the point is that
Poland.
nobody wanted to go to war except Winston Churchill.
That's right. Yeah.
And you got to realize that everything Churchill had done in his prior career turned out to be a disaster. Gallipoli,
was it Gallipoli?
The Admiralty,
yes.
Going off the gold standard, what he did with India.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everybody thought Churchill was mad in the sense of being insane and incompetent, and the record would argue in that direction. And so, going to Winston was really a step that was almost too far. Are there any lessons to be learned from that? I'm not sure that's the case.
Well, you know what that's like? That's like the classic case of, when you have an emergency, break the glass and pull this lever. There are times when you need to go that route. I had another item for you, always interesting. Are we going to have yet a fourth vote in Israel?
I don't know at this stage. Netanyahu is 2 seats away. Lieberman, of course, is doing his best, and this will unfold. I mean, Netanyahu is as you know, subject to court hearings over bribery and other serious charges. And even though he was close to winning a majority, who knows how that's going to end? And yes, there could be a fourth vote. But what this suggests, Bob, is the turmoil in which we find international politics wherever you look. Look at Afghanistan. We just signed an agreement with the Taliban, and unfortunately the word Taliban really is very diverse. There's no such thing as one Taliban. One hopes that it's going to work. I think the chances are slim to none that it will. I don't think the administration had a choice. And basically Ashraf Ghani, the president of Afghanistan, has said nonsense. I'm not going to release the 5,000 Taliban prisoners, basically saying that the agreement is null and void. But wherever you look, there is more violence, Africa, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in this particular situation, you really need a leader. And I don't want to oversize the point of America being the absolutely essential ingredient, because I don't believe that. But you need leadership. And I don't see America taking a strong role internationally. The notion of America first tends to suggest a withdrawal, and we are trying to withdraw from a number of places. But look, for example, in Iraq, Abadi, the likely next prime minister, said he didn't want the job. So you have Iraq without a government. Jordan is under great pressure. Banking crisis in Lebanon. We believe that Iran is now developing more fissile material. I do not believe they're going to get a bomb, but the fact is that reasonable people can differ on that. What's happening in China, you've got the virus right now, you've got stock markets in chaos, you've got Brexit. Germany is without a leader. I can go on and on and on and on with these issues. These are exciting times if you're in the news business or you're a writer of fiction.
Well, I was just going to say, spring is coming, Harlan. Harlan Ullman, our guest, 940. I got another item. I want to go back to Afghanistan for a moment. And I think you answered it with your first comment that there are many Talibans, because literally the ink wasn't dry on their agreement, and there was violence the next day.
Well, not only that, we struck and killed some 30 Taliban in an air raid. So what's the question?
Well, the question is this. Was this treaty just all for show and a pretext to get out? And I don't blame the president if he did it, but that's what it feels like.
Well, as you know, I'm a critic of presidents. I'm a particular critic of President Trump. But I don't think there was any option in this particular case to try to do a deal. We've been stuck in that place for 18 years. It was a mistake the way we went in the first place, because we were supposed to get Osama bin Laden, and then this turned into a nation-building exercise that was, tragic.
In the worst place in the world to try and build a nation, in my view. Anyway,
well, there is no nation. I mean, there are a series of tribes in Afghanistan. This goes back to, throughout all of history, to Alexander the Great.
Mm-hmm. The Great Game.
But the point here is that I think the administration wants to get out. I agree with that. And I think that trying to have some kind of an agreement, understanding that it's not likely to work, is the best of all the bad options. We'll see, but I don't think that we're going to see peace in our time in Afghanistan.
No, probably not. Hey, you know what I wanted to take a look at, if we still have a few minutes? When the president went to India, they rolled out the red carpet, hundreds of thousands of people. It looked like Nuremberg again. What was that all about?
It wasn't Nuremberg, but guess what happened in Delhi? You had all these riots and protests because Modi is not a Republican in the sense of being a Democratic leader. You have these huge racial problems, certainly against the Muslim population, other populations. And so all is not well in India either. So you have a world that's on the boil, and compounded by this virus, which one hopes will not worsen, but it obviously is going to spread, and we may not know until April, May, or June the full extent and where we are, which will create uncertainties. And an administration, I don't want to say that's indifferent to these broader issues, but is focused on winning the next election in November. And so with an absence of leadership, by default, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, I think, are seizing the high ground. And I'm not sure that's in the best interest of anyone other than Russia or China.
Well, the high ground, boy, that's hard to describe those countries going after the high ground. 943.
Who else is showing leadership and direction other than those two countries?
Well, I understand that. You mentioned earlier that when Putin goes, because sooner or later everybody does, and that is the great tragedy of strongmen. They actually hold some governments together, necessarily so. In fact, I thought they should have left Saddam where he was. How can a country as sophisticated as Russia is put themselves in that situation? Even Putin ought to know that he needs a successor.
Well, when you say Russia as sophisticated, I think Russians
That's the mistake.
are sophisticated. I'm not sure any country is sophisticated. And, when you take a look at Russia, you're talking about Western Russia and the rest. You're talking about Moscow and St. Petersburg and the elite. And there's a huge gap. And then you have this kind of divided personality of Russia. On the one hand, it wants to have influence, it wants to be arrogant, it wants to play, but this huge sense of inferiority. And so you have these sort of two faces of Janus with which you have to deal. On the one hand, Russia just tends to be defensive to protect itself, and part of that is to be offensive as a way of dealing with its insecurity. And so if you go back throughout the history, go back to the establishment of the Romanov dynasty in whatever it was, 1400, you've always had these particular issues here. And so how this is going to play out remains to be seen. I think that while there's no such thing as an average Russian, I think many Russians are concerned that the standard of living is not great enough. There have always been oligarchies, and there's always been the elite classes, whether they were knights and nobles or whether they're billionaires. And so I think Putin has been clever in trying to change, not only in trying, but in changing the Constitution to remove the balance of power not only to the parliament, but also to a small committee so that the presidency becomes less important. Yet you have all these issues bubbling up inside Russia. And rather like China, is there something that can fracture it? When Mikhail Gorbachev became General Secretary of Russia, of the Soviet Union, there had been a whole series of basically geriatrics who had been in charge from Brezhnev on, and so the country was sclerotic. Gorbachev recognized this and said, we need to have change, we need to have glasnost and perestroika, openness and restructuring to try to fix this system. And once he did that, he unleashed the gates of hell, and the country flew apart. I think that Russia still suffers from these similar problems, and we'll see whether or not Putin's personality can hold them together, or whether, because of succession, you're going to see factions and you're going to see Russia potentially coming apart again. I think it's unlikely, but it's something that we need to understand and at least be cognizant of.
What didn't happen that, for example, Gorbachev would have liked to see, or even a more sober predecessor to Putin? What did they really want that didn't happen?
No, what Gorbachev really wanted was for Russia to become a rationally organized country. And therefore he needed reform because the Soviet Union was irrational. Everybody lied about everything. The amount of production, the amount of this, the amount of that. And I don't want to simplify things by saying that the kulaks were kept restrained by having huge amounts of vodka. Mm-hmm. But you had a repressive society with the KGB and the MVD and the secret police and all those functions that could keep people down. Gorbachev's great lament was that his reform didn't work. That was not going to make Russia into a democracy, but it was going to make Russia into a more modern state. And I think that the issue here is that Russia still very much is a country, a 20th century country in a 21st century world. And how you make that adjustment to the 21st century with technology change, social changes, et cetera, is extraordinarily difficult. And whereas Putin has been extremely good in advancing Russian interests with a very weak hand, they haven't made the transition socially to the 21st century. That's the big challenge they face. That's the big challenge China faces, and that's a big worry. And in the West, while we may have made that transformation, there is no real leader. There's nobody who's got a profound understanding of these particular issues. We're too domestically focused. We're too polarized, so that if I have a good idea and I'm a Democrat, or you have a good idea and you're a Republican, we will refuse to accept it. We're going to say it's the worst idea in the world. And so when you have this clash of politics and this huge polarization, it's very, very difficult to be able to take on in a serious and rational way the more profound challenges and dangers that society faces.
I once asked and I forget his first name, so you forgive me. Goldman was his last name. He was a presidential historian who worked for the Washington Times. And I used to have him on regularly, and it was during Obama's presidency. And I said to him, if Obama had the cure for cancer in his pocket, and a Republican could steal it, rip it up, and burn it, would they do it? And he paused for a long time.
Yeah.
And he said, yes, they would, but so would the Democrats.
Yeah.
Do you hold that view as well?
Well, I wouldn't put it in those terms, but I think that there's a great story, a Russian story about two peasants, Oleg and Pavlov, and they hated each other. And one day, Oleg finds this thing in his garden, and it turns out to be a brass pot. He rubs it, and out comes a genie. And the genie says, Oleg, I'm the genie. I will give you whatever you want, but I'm going to give your neighbor twice as much. So Oleg thinks for a minute and says, pluck out one of my eyes.
Oh, my.
That's a Russian proverb, and that, unfortunately, is closer to describing American politics today.
Wow, 9:50. Boy, we've been through the gamut today. I guess I should throw in one more question. If Biden goes far, who would you pick for his vice president?
Biden needs to see which states he wins and which segment of society he needs. I would guess that women and the black community, the African American community, are on board. So I would be looking at a state like Minnesota or Michigan, and I think that Michigan's governor strikes me as a very very able lady. And so I think a woman who is good and a woman who can bring one of the critical states, Texas or Florida might be more critical. That's the sort of person. In terms of an actual personality, I don't have any names. I just have a description of what I think would bring most to his ticket and likely to win. Having said that, vice presidents usually don't make a difference. I mean, that's why Richard Nixon took Spiro Agnew. John McCain made a mistake of taking Sarah Palin because he was desperate. So the answer is I don't know, but my guess is that Biden will probably take a woman, but Geraldine Ferraro then looms large, and they better do a lot of background research to make sure they don't have a crisis in advance.
Well,
but
yes.
I think a woman makes sense, probably a woman from the Midwest. Whether she'll be a person of color or not, I don't know. But the way that you will need to do it is what can you capture that will make a difference in the election, certainly in the Electoral College, and will that candidate be helpful? And then, as important, if Biden, who's going to be 78, for whatever reason,
they better be
is
young.
that person capable to take on the presidency?
Since you brought it up, and I have 2 minutes, I have to go there. One of the greatest confoundings of my life was Sarah Palin. It broke my heart that anybody at that with that. I mean, she can give speeches and stuff, but how did that happen to America? And why did so many people support her?
Very simple. You got to know John McCain. John basically was a fighter pilot.
Yes.
And fighter pilots fall in love or in hate instantaneously. And John was very mercurial. I mean, as much as I love John and admire John, John loved you or hated you in an instant, and if he hated you, it's very, very difficult to get back on the right track.
Mm-hmm. Well,
He was desperate. He needed something to change the difference. He knew he needed to control the right-wing base. He saw her. His fighter pilot instincts kicked in. Boom. That's, I think, what happened emotionally. He should have taken Joe Lieberman, but the party, unfortunately, would not allow that. That would have been the wisest choice. But John, God love him, was an emotional guy, and he just saw Sarah, and it was political, and I don't say this in a sexual sense, but it was political love at first sight. She just filled the bill.
Yeah, because I got to tell you, I was in the John McCain camp the whole time until what I refer to on these airwaves now for 12 years as the day of the dingbat. I was threatened over my comments about Palin. People love Palin, and I'm still having a hard time. I mean, there are lots of people to admire. Maybe she should run a 7-Eleven. Maybe she could run a big office. Maybe she's a competent administrator. But there was absolutely nothing about that person that spoke to national or international politics. I'm still to this day befuddled that we had.
No, I think John thought he was in a desperate situation.
Yeah, I guess so.
And the personalities just clicked,
yeah.
And he thought that she was going to be his war winner.
Wow,
That's
you
simple.
betcha. I guess so. Well, listen, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time once again. Harlan Ullman, when are you going to write us a new book? You working on one yet?
Well, I'm working on a couple, whether I'm going to decide to devote the time to it or not. One I'm working on is called Westphalia II, a new political system that's emerged to which we're entirely ignorant. I've discussed in passing some of the outlines and some of the forces here. Unfortunately, a book in politics, unless you're a retired president or you're going to have a show and tell book, which I'm not, it doesn't really register very much, so I'm not sure it's worth the time to write a book that only you and 3 other people are going to read.
Yeah, well, maybe you get it out in a series of columns or something like that. I like that whole dynamic of the New Westphalia. Harlan Ullman, you are the best, sir. Thank you so very much. And remember,
My
go
pleasure,
out and buy
Bob.
his current book, Anatomy of Failure, How America Loses the Wars It Starts. Thank you so much. We've got people to thank, places to go, people to see. A last look at the weather. Maybe it actually really is 39 now because it was freezing when I came in here this morning. It is it's actually about 40 now. It's 40 degrees, going to get up to 46 today. Mixture of sun and clouds. You're seeing the clouds now. Now later today, they tell us we may have a drizzle, maybe even a snowflake. It gets down to 31 tonight. But the average temperature throughout the day is going to be 46. Saturday, lots of sunshine, 43. A little breezy, colder at 43. Sunday, sunshine, breezy, 56. And guess what? Monday, we're not going to, Monday's back to work. We're not going to be off for it, but mostly sunny. The temperature 64 degrees. We love it. And the weather's brought to you, of course, exclusively by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, voted one of America's rehabilitation and senior care campuses, and it's right here in New Rochelle. Visit uhgc.com. And this morning's program was also supported by United Hebrew of New Rochelle, a top-rated campus of senior care. Visit UHGC. Now they tell me it's .org. I'm sorry. It's uhgc.org. Aging Issues Management and their partners, Aging Issues Radio, the law firm of Payne & Con, Dominic's Fine Cigars, and Plug-in Virtual Reality. Great guests, great comments today. Vince Russo early today. Anthony weighing in on Mount Vernon. We had a very special guest who will be back next week for an hour. Richard Cerulli, writing books, plays, has a theater dedicated to plays, and also how to deal with mental illness. Jake, of course, and Steve Callis, along with Jake. Andrea Smith, I should say, talking about 5G. Dr. Victor Sternberg, and of course, Harlan Ullman. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. We're coming up on 10 o'clock, and Monday we'll have some special guests. We're going to bring on Bob Cox as a breaking story, so we're looking forward to talking with him. We couldn't get him on today, just too jam-packed. We also will be hearing from A.J. Woodson about what's going on in Mount Vernon, and we will be inviting on. We're going to make room for Mark Lingriello once again on Monday to talk about his story today, a breaking story, and we did our monologue about it today. When I say it's breaking, finally someone's ready to put back on the front page. Who dumped all that dirt in Mount Vernon? Why won't they open the books? Why did they force a mayor, though frailties he may have had, out of office for pining for these things, he dying on that battlefield? You've been listening to Radio Westchester. This is Mornings with Bob Marrone. I am Bob Marrone. We've got a lot more coming up next week, and it looks like we finally will be starting podhockey.com. For myself, Jake Schaefer, and all of us here, thank you for listening. Have a great weekend.